Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on when you consume this, maybe even in the evening. It's coming out the day after Christmas, so I hope that everybody had a good holiday season, spent some good time with family, and now you're looking forward, because 2023 is right around the corner. Now, before Christmas, I was telling you about Black Rifle Coffee, and it's the best, or not the best, but like a great gift to give somebody if they are interested in coffee, right? You could do a coffee subscription, you could get them stuff to make coffee, apparel, merchandise, all of those things. And obviously, if you're listening to this now and you didn't take advantage of that, well, guess what? You missed out for Christmas. But all of those opportunities actually still exist. Whether you're thinking about, the best way to start your day, a gift you would want to give somebody for their birthday. My personal recommendation is joining one of the coffee clubs. It's fire and forget. You pick what you want. You pick the frequency. You pick the blend and roast that you want. And now, guess what? You can add to that the cleared hot blend of coffee. So it truly is your one-stop shop for all of your coffee needs. Go to blackriflecoffee.com and go to town. Get whatever you want. Get as much as you want, as little as you want. I don't know what you want, but you can get it right there, and I highly recommend it. And that's all. That's the business portion of today's episode. My guest today is a repeat guest. His name is Nic McKinley. Currently, right now, he is the CEO and was, because I guess since it's already been founded, you have to say was, but is the founder of DeliverFund. Now, I've had Cara Smith on the podcast before, multiple times. I've had Nic on the podcast multiple times. I'm going to continue to do so because DeliverFund is designed around ending human trafficking. Before DeliverFund, Nic has an interesting background, for sure. He was a PJ in the Air Force, and then he worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. And what I can say is he brings all of those skills to the table and many more when it comes to combating human trafficking with DeliverFund. So that's probably enough. I think I can let Nic speak for himself. So here we go. Episode number 265 with Nic McKinley. Enjoy.
Okay, got the red smoke. Gun run, north or south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke. Okay, copy, west of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now. Come on with it, baby, give it to me, I need it. Get cleared hot. Copy, cleared hot.
Where should we begin? Actually, I know where we have to begin.
Where's that? SBP?
We could talk about the special blend, please, if you want to. That was more of a story for off-air. Because
this is a family-friendly program.
It's not at all. It's not at all. I had to look.
It depends on the family.
That's true, but I made sure to click the explicit button on the hosting service, which I think is a warning to anybody because I've never once not listened or watched a show because it had explicit on it.
True.
So it's capable of being standalone, repeat guest a few times, but for people just maybe finding the podcast or tuning in, give us the wave tops of your background, if you will. And don't skip the good shit. Otherwise, I'm going to dive in. All right? Really focus on the article that was written about you called The Real Life Jason Bourne, or whatever the fuck it was called.
It wasn't The Real Life Jason Bourne. Because Jason Bourne is really bad at his job, man. He's constantly getting caught. Right? You think about it. Jason Bourne.
No, he wins at the end of every one.
Does he, though?
Well, let's also be honest. If there was ever a Jason Bourne,
right,
like that movie is a combination of about 50 people's job.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A buddy of mine sent me a TV show called SEAL Team the other day.
Yeah.
Some clips for it. The technical direction in it, really good. Really good. Like, it seemed like they really know what they're doing. All the kit looked right. Everything looked right. But within one single episode, you have the stories that would make up like 30 dudes' careers.
Yeah.
In one episode.
I haven't watched an episode. I've been sent those same clips. But essentially, they're doing strategic level warfare in a 30-minute show from surging from somewhere into the U.S. globally, sourcing the intelligence, developing the total network.
Internal.
Internally, of course. All internal. Probably just over Wi-Fi as you're on the flight overseas. And then actioning the target in 30 minutes.
So you know what that just goes to prove? It's the theory that all of us have had, right? You get to JSOC, you get to the CIA, and you go, wow, this must be a cover for the real thing.
I think I've told people this before. I spent very little time up there, but in the time I was there, I realized that if a curtain was pulled back and people thought it was going to be like an arc reactor from the Tony Stark movies, like something incredibly out of this world, what they would discover is a donkey with flies buzzing around its head.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was just one of those flies. So that's my background. Air Force Pararescue turned CIA. I was one of the flies buzzing around the head of the donkey.
How long were you pararescue for, though?
11 years.
Okay.
11 years. So 96 to 2007. My last year was in the reserves until I realized that it's very, very difficult to be a reserve soft guy and have companies at the same time.
Oh,
so yeah, I kind of had to choose.
Don't skip over the fact you served with the most interesting PJ ever, which is Will Willis.
I did.
That man is. They made a mold somewhere and then broke it immediately afterward.
So we were instructors together. You could imagine the things that I learned. I mean, that guy took hazing to an art form never before been experienced by the U.S. military. I mean,
what are your thoughts on hazing, given the modern optic of the U.S. military? I maintain contacts with some people in the SEAL community. Hazing was a term that even in the late 90s, there was probably no attention paid to the term hazing. I remember in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, it started shifting a little bit, and now it's from a doctrinal level, let's just say on paper, highly frowned upon. What are your thoughts?
That's just because we gave it a name. If we just would have stuck to it not having a name or not calling it hazing, it probably would have been just fine.
Do you think it has its place?
Absolutely.
I would agree with you.
I mean, I remember. So the first time I ever heard somebody die, right? The agonal, the agonal respirations, right? Was actually at dive school. It was a Filipino.
Really?
Yeah, Filipino Special Forces guy got sent to CDQC, and which is where I went to dive school.
Is that Florida?
Yeah, Key West, Florida. And he went under, didn't come up for a while, and by the time he came up, he was flatlined. So pull everybody out of the pool, make everybody face outboard. Everybody's facing away from him. The 18 Deltas, and there was a PJ down there, Troy Arcee. Or was it Troy Arcee or Steve Sanko? One of the two was the PJ, attaché instructor, and them and the Delta went to work on this guy. Brought him back. Phenomenal job, absolutely phenomenal job. Shocked him, brought him back, and that sound that people make when they come back. That like it's a terrible sound. I won't make it for your audience.
Yeah,
but the
agonal breathing is actually worse, I think, than the coming back.
Yeah. But so I was at the time though 18 years old, or 19 years old. So like I had no idea like what was one and what was the other, right? Yeah. All I knew is it just sounded absolutely terrible. And oh, by the way, that guy just died doing the thing that I'm going to be doing in the next 2 minutes. Okay. So
pass rate just took a nosedive after that for the day, probably.
We lost 3 dudes that day. Right then after that, they were like, that's it, I'm out. It's extremely important. And it's sad that kind of stuff has to happen. But I mean,
that wasn't hazing though. That was an evolution.
Well, was it though? I mean, because
you're training under the water.
Yeah, you're training evolutions, right? You're ditching Dawn with full. What do they call it? It wasn't full contact. It was full harassment, is I believe what the Army called it. I mean, show me the line between full harassment, twin 80 ditch and Dawn and hazing.
Hazing is, hypothetically.
Sure.
Of course.
Sure.
Not that I've ever seen
Miller boards, duct tape.
That's what I was going to say. Spine board, duct tape, and then the spine board is vertically put into the grate of the Ford Suburban ambulance, driven down the beach, and then
allegedly
through the bars on Orange Avenue in Coronado, and you're carried through. Allegedly
covered in sea dye.
Yeah, or allegedly being out at a desert training facility and somehow a shopping cart is discovered and you're handcuffed to it being put into the shower with your eyebrows and your head shaved a few days before you get married, allegedly. Not
that stuff happens. It happens. So that type of thing. I mean, really, boys will be boys, and anybody who knows any men, for the most part, like psychologically, we don't really progress much past the age of 14. So
Yeah.
I don't. Some of that stuff, I mean, I think it's up to leadership and whether or not it's tolerated. It's up to the culture. Obviously, there's lines where those types of things can go too far. But I think a lot of the training evolutions that in the news are currently being called harassment, right? I think of the biggest one was I think it was tear gas in the
San
SEAL
Clemente
teams.
Island.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, oh, okay, so I know. Let's make it so the first time these guys experience this stuff is downrange when somebody launches it at them and they get in a stairwell, and instead of them having experienced it before, because some bad guys get their hands on that stuff, because let's face it, I mean, they're buying this kind of crap off Amazon, buying it off the dark web, right?
I would if I was in their shoes.
Absolutely. So you're in a stairwell and then somebody pops off on that stuff and you're experiencing it for the very first time going, what is this? Instead of going, oh, I've been here before. I know I can drive through it. Let's keep driving through it. So I think, I don't know about your experience, but my experience in both pararescue and the CIA, training was significantly harder than combat.
Which
always,
I think, is the mark of training correctly.
It's supposed to be.
So on the tear gas thing, two thoughts on that. One, my biggest issue with that is that the video is apparently taken by an instructor.
Yeah, that's
so
a
it's
no-go.
like, hey, just do your fucking job and put
Right.
your cell phone away. Two, apparently there were people in that evolution that shouldn't have been. So that occurred, I believe, out on San Clemente Island, which is the last phase of Bud's training. And let's just say I have heard from more than one person that there were support personnel being exposed to the gas as well, and also the volume of gas that they chose to use deviated from the standard.
Okay.
So I agree with it.
So we have issues here.
Yeah, I
none
agree
of which
with-
have anything to do with hazing.
Correct.
It's a leadership failure.
Well, it's an instructor failure at that point, and it can cast. You could, of course, it is a leadership failure at the end of the day. Like, first question is, who was the senior man?
Mm-hmm.
Where was the leadership there? Were these people off? How the fuck were they allowed to deviate from the standard? Which, having experience at that particular schoolhouse, it's in a 3-ring binder.
Mm-hmm.
The evolutions. I thought when I went to Bud's that it was going to be this creative landscape of
No.
I am going to get to do whatever I want to do. Because I remember the things that were done to me. And I can tell you this. When I was going through, I'll speak about it super broadly, there were students that were injured by an instructor that was off the reservation. Not in my class, but very close to the time period that I went through. Specifically, what I can remember is a spinal injury from excessive weight on somebody's head. As if the boats aren't heavy enough, maybe there's additional weight in the boat. That... you go back as an instructor, like, I can do whatever I want to. And then you check in and you go through the indoctrination, and they're like, hey, so here's the binders. Here's day 1, and here's day 60. And just do what it says in the binder, and you're not authorized to do anything outside of that. I'm like, oh, okay, but what about when the students make a mistake? Like, I can just go off the reservation then. They're like, oh, no, here's our remediation standards. This is the exact number of push-ups that you're allowed to have them do. You can actually only remediate them for 30 minutes without going to the next higher level of authority in your phase. And then the OIC has to be there. Oh, they really messed up? I forget what they called it, like a level 2 or level 3 remediation. Yeah, the OIC of the phase needs to go up to the skipper's office, explain what happened and why they deserve that level of punishment or remediation, because we can't use terms like punishment. And then both of them will probably be on site during the remediation. Like, there was no room for creativity, and I'm actually glad that's the case, because the standards need to weed people out, not people who are looking for a position of authority over those who have no power whatsoever.
Yeah, no gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And so I was an instructor at PJ School with Will Willis. Speaking of creativity,
That dude.
what that dude could
I
come
love
up with
that guy.
was absolutely amazing. I mean, there's a lot of PJs who can tell Will Willis stories on just, because he's a hilarious human just by existence.
They truly broke the mold with
And
him.
then he is also, at the time, he was a very different person. He was extremely pissed off all the time, just at life in general.
He was going through some rough life circumstances.
Going through some rough life circumstances. That's a good way to put it. And so he had an outlet for that. But the only creativity we were allowed in pararescue, like there's this guy, he's got a podcast too. His name's Brian Kimber. And so BK, I mean, by the time you're in PJ school, like, can I really hurt you with push-ups? Especially the amount that they let me do. No, you're in such good shape. You've been doing this for 2 years now. You're like, oh, you want me to do push-ups? Cool. Which arm? Right? It's just like, what are you going to do? So this guy was very bright and absolutely hilarious. So I just make him write papers. Be like, hey, tomorrow you're going to write a paper on this completely ridiculous subject that I just picked, and it better be funny, right? Or you would have the creativity of, and I really love doing this to the officers when they'd screw up. Right. So let's say you're an officer. Sorry.
I was.
And
for 5 years only. I wasn't a real officer though. I just like borrowed one of the uniforms.
Yeah. You know, hey, just when it suited you and you screwed up, it'd be like, hey, you over there, you do push-ups.
You'd punish other people.
Oh yeah. You watch them, you know, oh, we're going to run back to barracks, but oh, not you, sir. You're going to drive the van. Make sure you get that air conditioning up real good. Make sure you get yourself real comfortable. Right. And I would make them follow in the van, and I found that those were extremely effective remediation when it was, because to me,
if they cared, that's probably the most valuable remediation you could give them.
Well, but also tell me that doesn't sum up SOF, right? And because in special ops, if you're lucky, you die.
That's true.
If you're unlucky, somebody else dies because of your mistake, right? And then you have to live with that. And I know plenty of people who are living with those demons. By the grace of God, I didn't have to live with any of those demons. Yeah. And but it's, I mean, man, if I'd been in the same situation as some of the people that I know who made those mistakes and they ended up taking somebody else's life, I probably would have done the same thing. So it's not because I was better. I just wasn't in the same situation, and I wouldn't want to live with that. So that was really, as an instructor, that was the lesson that I was trying to put forward. Then also, you know, by the time I was an instructor, most of the PJs I know who died had died in training. I mean, I'd say it was probably...
what year was this?
So that was 2003 to 2006.
Okay.
And so, you know, the war had only been kicked off for a couple of years.
And
Iraq.
it was a slow roll.
Yeah, super slow roll in the beginning.
Probably more kinetic up front in Afghanistan than a slower pace. Mm-hmm. Not very kinetic at the early stages of Iraq, but then like 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Standby.
So my first time, so I went into Northern Iraq with a task force in 2001. Remember when the Pentagon and the CIA were having their little spat about who done it on September 11th? Mm-hmm. Well, the first task force out of the country was actually a task force that was focused on Northern Iraq, because Rumsfeld was like, no, this was Saddam. This is our chance to get Saddam. And obviously the agency knew it was bin Laden and the Taliban and all that, and so they sent Triple Nickel and, you know, the GB dudes and all that.
The horse soldiers.
Yeah, I was on a task force that went into Turkey, and our whole mission was battlefield prep for the Iraq War. Well, then when everybody figured out, hey, it's Afghanistan, and dudes started deploying to Afghanistan, we're like, oh, cool. Well, we're already here. Clearly, they're just going to send us. And they're like, no, we're rolling in here in 2003. You guys just keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, what? Seriously? Like, so anyway, so yeah, most PJs I knew who died had, I mean, it was a 2-to-1 training to combat ratio. Easy, maybe even more than that.
What kind of evolutions was killing them?
Primarily free fall stuff, and then helicopter crashes.
Really?
So, oh yeah. I mean, you know, helicopters basically have the flight characteristics of a safe.
And that's when the engines are working.
Yeah, I mean, and there's oil in them.
Yeah.
Or any other fluid. They're just. Yeah, I mean, I lost my 2 best friends right out of PJ school, about 6 months out of PJ school. One was in one helo, one was in the other helo. They were doing some training out at what's that big range outside of Nellis?
Oh God,
Indian Springs, I think, something like that. Anyway,
yeah, I can't.
Doesn't matter. One of those bazillion acre training ranges outside of Nellis on a workup. One guy, 2 helos crashed into each other.
all the airspace in the world, but they seem to want to occupy the same one.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that just started. And then after that, it was, we lost a guy, water free fall. Remember back in the day before you were using the FF2s?
Yes.
Right. I remember that, getting that sucker pulled. And yeah.
Those were, I'm going to describe as unreliable at best.
Especially when they decided to go ahead and pull your main canopy for you.
Oh my God, that's right.
When you were at
attached
high
to your main.
altitudes. Yeah.
Okay, so for people listening who going, what the fuck are Andy and Nick talking about? So an FF2, in modern era equipment is great. There's
digital, beautiful.
It's digital. Is Cypress. There is Vigil, and it's a small computer that has parameters both with airspeed and altitude, I believe, barometric pressure. And if you meet it, it will fire a small explosive charge with a razor blade that goes through your reserve closing loop, and it fires off your reserve. So, and I think Cypresses alone have, I think they have like over 800 documented saves.
Oh, I bet.
And it's a great piece of equipment. And that's not what we were using in the military.
Shockingly.
Yeah, well, this was probably on like MT1Xs before even the MT2Xs. So imagine taking that safety device.
We were jumping FF2s on MC2s still, even when the MC2 came out.
God, I had forgotten though. So the Cypress being attached to your reserve is great. Yeah. Because, let's say you have a malfunction with your main, maybe you have a super hard opening, whatever it may be. If the criteria is met, more silk is going to come out into the wind. It's not actually silk, but it's the commonly used term. Now imagine taking that safety device, which was bigger than this fucking phone, by the way, and had a big old cable and a red little knob at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you put it on your main. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And you would arm it on the way up.
It's a mechanical device.
I was going to say, I swear to God.
No, because remember, you could arm it on the ground, but then it used your barometric pressure only. So you would arm it, right? You'd pull it, you'd connect it to your chute and all that.
The little red thing.
Yeah,
like
and then
you'd
have to pull that, once you got up to altitude, before exit, you could arm your FF2 once you actually got up to altitude.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible.
They'd
freaking go off in the airplane.
That's what I was just going to say.
Jump masters have them go off and the freaking lapes them out the back door.
I distinctly remember being in a C-130 in like Thailand, and we were doing jump operations with the Thai SEALs, and the ramp was closed. And I don't remember if we were ascending or descending, and I don't even think I was free fall qualified at the time, but I remember a bunch of guys standing up in their rigs, and all of a sudden they were all like, and they kind of like lurched forward, and pilot chutes were just flying and bouncing off the back of the thankfully closed C-130.
Yeah, we had a guy stand up, and something similar happened. Made the FF2 think that it was at a lower barometric pressure than it should have been, and just freaking lapes the jump master right out the back.
I mean, I'm almost a fan of that.
I mean, thank God he didn't get hurt.
Yeah, but visually that had to have been amazing.
Yeah. But so for the audience, some of the military Cypress is a waterproof unit, so you can jump it on water jumps.
Civilians ones now are too.
Oh, they are. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I've been out of the game for a minute.
They didn't used to be, and I just think as the technological innovations continue, the price point to make them waterproof probably just.
Well, when I left the military in 2007, we were doing a workup down at Eloy, and we had just gotten the military javelins in.
Yep.
2007. And I think JSOC had gotten them like 6 months before.
We did the testing on those in like 04, 05.
Okay. So yeah, totally mainstream then. I mean, they were being, handed out to standard SOCOM, standard rescue units.
Yeah.
And that's the very first time that I started using a Cypress. Before that, it was all FF2s. So on water jumps, there's no FF2.
Correct. It's just such a bad idea to put it on your main.
Yeah, so we lost a guy. He is the investigation and thought that his he pulled his ripcord and his pilot chute, the strap on his pilot chute.
Bridle.
Yeah, thank you. Again, been a minute.
Yeah.
Wrapped around the strobe on the back of his helmet. And back then, I'm sure you remember back then it was like nothing can fall off of you.
Yeah,
everything has to be
everything.
tied, duct taped, super glued, right? And then
Velcro
yeah,
is not enough.
No, you can't have Velcro. Well, so if your strobe, right, those old school strobes is connected to your helmet and your bridle wraps around it, like it's just going to pull on your head. Oh, and you know, what are you going to do? So
even if you were able, let's say you were able to cut it away, if it's still attached to your head, the likelihood of your reserve entangling with your main is super high.
Super high. So when they found that chute, both the main and the reserve were deployed. No idea, obviously, what happened in free fall because you're hopping out at what, 3,500 feet
on a water jump,
3,000 feet, something like that on a Rams package. So, whole point being, that's how we were losing guys. And so training was always to kind of bring this back around. Training was always so much harder than combat. Even the volume of fire. I mean, the volume of fire in training always seemed to be like, dude, I know I shot that guy like 17 times, but he just keeps coming back to life, and he has this like endless supply of munitions. Versus real world combat, the bad guys tend not to have as much ammo as they do in training.
I can put it to you like this: I've never run out of ammo in country, but I've run out of ammo a lot of times in training.
Oh yeah.
Like you said, the volume of fire. Like, God, 6 magazines isn't enough. I guess I'll just take 12 on this. And then in real life, I'm like, I'm going to swap out mags just so I'm topped off here.
Yeah, or you're in training and you're on a belt fed and guys are just freaking heating up barrels on a belt fed. And I've seen Rangers do that downrange for sure. But like any PJ element I'd ever been with, any agency element I'd ever been with, I mean, it was, maybe half a belt, and we just weren't. Now there's obviously the exceptions to that rule, but those tend to be like much larger, more coordinated Haditha Dam type operations. And so it was, I think that the whole hazing thing, like we need to define what is hazing and what is a training evolution. And quite frankly, the civilian reporters just need to keep their freaking nose out of it. Like it's not for you. So if the Navy, if the Air Force, if the Army, if the Marine Corps as an entity, if their leadership and their teams feel that a training evolution went too far, then they can deal with that. New York Times, just stay out of it because quite frankly, you didn't earn the right to have an opinion. And they're not the ones affected by the opinion, right? And I think that's where the pushback against the reduction in standards, we'll call it. I
actually think that's what it's called.
Well, it's not what the military is calling it.
How are they spinning? What are they spinning that as? Because it's exactly what it is.
So,
like they're changing the PRTs, the physical readiness tests. And for, I don't know how it is in the PJ community, but the SEAL community people have been lobbing ideas at what they should do about the curriculum because they look at the attrition rate and say, hey, this is what it's been. It floats a little bit, wintertime versus summertime, of course. But up until this point that I'm aware of, the SEAL community has done an exceptional job at that entry-level BUDS pipeline of not deviating from the standards. And when they do that, if they do that, and whether that be they want to have females come through training, whatever it may be, that spells the beginning of the end to me. Not the females coming into training, the modifying of standards.
Modifying of the standards for the purpose of accomplishing an outcome, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how it is in the current PJ, Air Force Special Warfare community. I mean, that thing changes almost more than the freaking Marines do. So I have no idea what's going on over there now and how the standards have changed. Friends who are in have just told me there has been a reduction in standards. I've heard that more on the combat control side, but I've also heard that a lot of it's been incorporated. I mean, I'm just kind of old and irrelevant experience at this point, but the reduction in standards directly translates to people not being able to do the job, which directly translates to people getting killed because they can't meet the standard. I mean, the great thing about being a combat diver is a great example. It doesn't matter if you're an Army combat diver, you're a Navy combat diver, you're a Marine Corps combat diver, Air Force, you met the combat dive qualification standard, which is set by the Department of the Navy. Full stop. You met that standard. If you're Halo qualified, doesn't matter which school you went to, you met that standard. So you know somebody's capable of performing at a bare minimum of that standard. You can't say that for somebody who, say, went through an advanced free fall program over a weekend, right? Big difference between that person and somebody who went through a Halo school.
Oh, yeah.
Huge difference. So a PADI dive instructor, whatever, right? Huge difference between that person and somebody who is a qualified combat diver. And so I think the establishment of a standard, like the standard has to mean something, and then that is the standard. So at DeliverFund, it's a great example. We get a lot of people who want to volunteer for DeliverFund. You know, I'm really good at figuring out who people are on Instagram. Awesome. That's not what we do. But they think that they should be able to volunteer to help DeliverFund with counter human trafficking operations, of which is going to restrict people of their liberty. If we get it wrong, potentially hurt somebody's livelihood. If we get it wrong from a prosecutorial standpoint, a bad guy walks. Like, these are high consequence things. We have a standard. You want to work for DeliverFund? Awesome. We have an assessment and selection. It's all done from a keyboard. No pull-ups, no running anymore, no swimming, but it's an assessment and selection because that works. And so we know, and all of our other analysts know, that every single person in the organization is capable of producing an intelligence product that meets at least this standard. And I think the standards are extremely important for that. So if the military wants to reduce the standard of arguably some of the best programs in the world simply because they want somebody to be able to come out on the pipeline on the other side, then they need to say that. Because every other person who's making the decision to go into that pipeline is making that decision on, I want to see if I can get through it. And if I can, then I know that everybody I'm operating with has been through it. Not, I want to see if I can work with that person over there. Well, right? So it's a different standard to look at it through the lens of a collective standard versus an individual standard, right? We all know people who, I'm sure you know SEALs. I definitely knew PJs who once they got their beret, they had this attitude like, I have arrived. Yeah. I have nothing else to do. I have arrived. Instead of saying, no, you just started. Yeah. Like, all you did when you got your beret is prove that you can meet the bare minimum standard. It's just up from here. Yeah. It's like you're like a square of clay at the end of the pipeline, and then you need to spend the rest of your career refining it and building it into whatever object or metaphor would work. And the standards, to go to that point, they have to be, in my mind at least, driven from the real world demands of what is going to be expected of somebody in that occupation. So, absolutely. And that's where I have the big rub with anybody who wants to modify standards for the benefit of inclusivity, which I'm not against inclusivity. But if you're just changing the standard so you can say more of whatever fill in the blank group can achieve this, and it's not based on what's going to be the challenges of the real world execution of that occupation, all you're doing is you're just lying to the people who are going to that course, and you're setting them up for failure later on, like you already talked about. But it's somehow that's missed, and I don't understand how that's even remotely possible. I don't get it either. There was this phenomenal PJ I went through selection with, a guy named Dave Schumann. He was in my graduating PJ class. The guy's a freaking legend. He ended up retiring. By the time he retired, he was running the Alaska unit. I mean, the guy's probably one of the best athletes, like out of the box athletes you'll ever meet. Like off the couch, 5-minute miles, no problem. Oh, you
won the genetic lottery.
Yeah, you want me to do 25 pull-ups? No problem. I mean, he's just that guy. Incredibly cool, awesome leader. He was a Force Recon Marine before he became a PJ, and he went through the entire PJ pipeline, even though there were portions of it that he already had comparable training as a Force Recon Marine that he didn't have to go through. Well, he went through them anyway because he didn't want anybody to say that he wasn't held to the same standard. Yeah. That's pretty incredible. that also shows a lot about his character and the character of people like that. I was talking to a very well-known professional MMA fighter 2 nights ago. And he was telling me that he wanted to basically get in the mix. Like I think a lot of people do about the, people who haven't.
Get in the mix like overseas, get in the mix?
Yeah. Yeah. Like he wanted to go do the, as he said, the doer side of working for the government. And I was like, okay, like tell me about the movie that's playing in your head. Because you get these calls, I get these calls.
Yeah.
People are like, I think I want to be a this. I'm like, well, hold on. I happen to know a lot about all these different soft units and how they actually work. Tell me what it is you want to do, and then that will help me direct you into the right place. So he was like, well, I'm in my 30s now, or he was in his early 30s, and he's like, I think I've proven I'm one of the toughest people alive. I don't feel like I should have to go through an 18 to 24 month school and selection process.
I would just run that right up the flagpole and
like,
see how that comes out.
Roger that, man. He's like, and he started telling me about how he'd spent all this money, his own money, learning shooting and going to CQB schools. I was like, that's awesome. For any given unit, that's maybe 5% of the job.
Yeah.
So what? You're good. You've proven that you're good at 5% of the job. You think that means that you shouldn't have to meet the same standards as everybody else. Just like I'm sure, he was a jiu-jitsu black belt, right? So I used to teach combatives for Greg Jackson. But if I go to I have started trying to train at SBG here when schedule allows. Schedule is
I like how
very,
you put in there,
very, very
trying.
Different. Yeah, very, very different.
What were you saying before we went live? You've been to 5 classes in 4 months?
Yeah, about that.
That's a perfect trajectory for a 70-year black belt.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I will, they will give me my black belt and because I sure as heck won't have earned it at that point. When I die, just be like, how they give degrees.
Yeah.
They'll just be like, okay, well, here you go. Like, we're going to go ahead and give you a black belt because we feel bad because you're dead, So it doesn't matter how much training I have based on my past life.
Yeah.
I'm the freaking new guy there. I don't know what I'm doing. I got a white belt, which is exactly what I need and where I should be. And someday, should I get a belt that is anything other than white, it will because I have met the standard that they have set in order to attain that. So then anybody else who comes in will say, oh, I recognize the symbol of that standard. And that's why I think standards are so important. So if you want certain people to come out of a pipeline on the other side, then cool. Then call the pipeline something different. Change the logo. Yeah. Change the flash, change the trident, change something. But don't try to say that it's the same thing.
Yeah, don't tell me that
it's not.
You want X population group, like we need to change things so X population group can go through SEAL training. It's like, okay, it's just not SEAL training anymore.
Right.
They made it through SEAL training adjacent, SEAL training modified. Like just
we've had. I mean, I know in the Air Force, and I think NavSpec War has the same thing, which is direct support.
Yes.
Right. You go through selection light. Right? You go through training light.
You go through selection that is directly related and applicable to the job that you're going to do.
Yeah. CAG's been doing the same thing for like 20 years.
Correct.
They're like, hey, we have a logistics guy, but we need that logistics guy to have a little bit more combat skills. We want to know that they're a little more resilient. So we're going to put them through a little more to see if they can attain that standard.
And it would actually, to use the CAG example, be unrealistic for them to put them through S&T or whatever they call it.
Yeah, or OTC or whatever.
That's not going to be their job. However, if you're going to be more proximal, like when I deployed with the CAG guys, they had comm guys in the field. They had logistics guys in the field. Great idea to expose them to whatever you might call it. But they don't need to go through the whole operator training course.
No. And they also don't need to be inside the stack. Great.
I don't think they want to be.
Good point.
I'm not sure that they want to be. Yeah. Everybody wants to be in the stack until it gets really, really two-way-ish.
Yeah.
On the range. And then it's like, fuck.
And then if you're not prepared, you will know it rather quickly.
Why do they have a belt-fed machine gun and I don't? This is
That's
bullshit.
Sandbagged into the corner.
Yeah.
It's almost like they knew we were coming.
Or at the top of the fucking stairs. And why is there a pressure plate underneath this front door mat?
Yeah.
Fuck,
Yeah.
you guys have been doing your homework. Do you enjoy that process of starting over, tying a white belt around your waist and being the new guy again?
100%.
If I could
just be independently wealthy and just go learn stuff, just go deep dive, immerse stuff. I mean, one of my problems now is, my SaaS company I exited, but I still got DeliverFund. I've got a coffee company, my own now, because everyone's doing it. All the cool guys are, so I may as well too.
Some of us are doing it better than others. I mean, not to judge.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
I've got 2 kids. I'm skiing again, getting back into ice climbing. I mean, that's just okay, where's the time?
Yeah.
And so if I could just say, all right, I'm just going to go focus on jiu-jitsu for the next 2 years, that would be amazing. That's also never going to happen, because right now is the time in my life, right? I'll be 45 in March. I had to think about that for a second. TBI is real.
It's a true story.
So if this is the time I'm supposed to be doing the things that I'm doing. I can go spend my time learning jiu-jitsu anytime I want later in life. But
it'll be different. But
it'll
yes.
definitely be different. Absolutely. Yeah. Am I going to learn as fast? Probably not. Am I going to wake up a little more sore in the morning? Sure. But if I want to have that time later in life, I've got to put in the work that I'm putting in now, because I chose, for right or wrong, at 40 years old to basically hit the reset button on my life and go into completely different fields and start doing completely different things. And so that means I got to build up to that.
Are you glad you made that decision?
Absolutely.
Do you wish you had made it earlier?
Ooh, that is a good question.
Like, if you could go back in a time machine, would you have pulled the trigger at 35 versus 40, knowing what you know now?
I would have studied different things
to prepare yourself.
Yeah. Right. So in a perfect world, I would have been a little more strategic, would have seen the direction the world was going. And instead of studying philosophy and politics in my 20s, I would have been studying technology and learning to code. Right. So instead it was like, okay, well, now at, 35, 40, you've got to play catch up, Nick. And I think everybody probably goes through that, but I would have said, okay, this is where I want to end. I would have just reverse planned it, right? This is where I want to end up, and these are the things that I need to do. So I maybe would have actually written out the government stuff a little bit longer.
Really?
Yeah, just so that
you would have been working on your weekends, though.
Yeah, that's right. Just so I could take advantage of the learning opportunity, because as you know, the government, and especially the military, like the educational opportunities are absolutely phenomenal.
They're robust.
I mean, they're incredible, and they don't cost you a dime. So you can graduate the military, so to speak, and also graduate with multiple degrees, multiple professional certificates under your belt. And I wish I would have taken that a little more seriously when I was in my 20s.
I always tell people when they're looking at joining the military that the military is going to get their pound of flesh up front.
You may as well get yours.
That's exactly what I say. And it's like, look at the things that are available. Like, my GI Bill is about ready to time out because I've been out for almost 10 years and I don't even know what the fuck I would use it on.
Yeah.
But
pilot's license.
I already have them all. I literally don't even know what I would study. What I know is this: had I gone to college when I was 18, I would have failed. Mm-hmm. Not that I am a specimen of maturity now, but I certainly was not at the age of 18.
You knew how to fake it better now, right? Back then you didn't.
100%.
You hadn't learned how to fake it.
You learn how to put the mask on better.
That's right.
In this situation, I am supposed to say this, but now, as I was getting out of the military, I was aware of those options, and I tried to switch over my GI Bill actually to my kids to the post 9/11 GI Bill. Mm-hmm. And for those of you listening who are going to want to do that, to the best of my knowledge, there's a service requirement passed when you make that switch, and I think it's actually 3 years.
Oh, really?
So I
didn't know that.
You need to do it like within. You need to have at least 3 years left on your contract to swap that sucker over.
Okay.
I didn't have the opportunity to do that because I was going through the medical retirement process, so it just basically stays with me. But I do think about that. Like, what could I use it for? The pilot license one, I would do that if I didn't have all my licenses. You can't use it for your private, but you can use it for everything after that, your instrument, commercial, multi, all that, and that's a great utilization. I was actually talking to Mike Glover, texting about it the other day because his GI Bill is getting ready to time out. I was like, hey, man, like this is a good utilization for it, and it'll cost you $5 to $8 grand to get your private, and then you can do all of that stuff on the side, but it's I wish I also would have taken a little bit more time to get my pound of flesh as well. I honestly, and I think you would probably agree that organizations that we used to work for are really good at keeping you mission focused and head down and in, as opposed to up and out and kind of looking around a little bit.
Yeah, I spent every penny of my GI Bill.
Did you really?
Every penny.
Good for you.
Every single penny. So I ended up with 2 associate's degrees, 2 bachelor's degrees, and I dropped out of my master's program because something in my life had to give, and that sure as heck wasn't feeding me or my family. In fact, I might have been getting dumber as I was in the graduate program. But I only had 6 classes left, and that was a big deal for me. I mean, that was a real existential crisis. I've never quit anything in my life. Well, like, what do you mean? I'm gonna quit grad school? That was a lot of self-reflection to learn that it's actually okay to quit something that isn't serving you. But
I've said this before, and I believe it to be true. The mentality of both of the communities that we came from, that it is unacceptable to quit ever, regardless of the situations, is one of the sharpest double-edged swords that I've ever been around.
Absolutely.
Because it does enable individuals and teams to do things that people will scratch their head at and go, how in the fuck were you able to do that? And it will also, not so much teams I have found, but it will allow individuals to take that mentality straight into an early grave.
Yeah, it's one side is a professional rocket ship. Yeah. One side of that double-edged sword is a professional rocket ship.
Followed by a personal cliff.
Yeah, is a path to self-destruction. And that's what I found is that, I mean, so that, drive on at all cost mentality actually got me through a lot of really interesting classes in grad school that I hadn't properly studied for the tests. I'm dealing with all these like Ivy League folks who like, this is what they're doing all day, every day. And I'm like catching up on a Saturday, and I'm doing everything on a Saturday. And there were so many times when I thought, man, I should just quit. But I didn't. There's no way I'm going to pass this test. I mean, the test is going to select me out. And then next thing you know, I was like, holy smokes, I got to be on that thing? How did I do that? And so it just managed to get through it. But at what price?
The professional side.
But at what price?
The personal side. I've watched people auger in on utterly unhealthy relationships because they didn't want to walk away, because they thought that if they did walk away, that it was going to be a reflection of them and their personal failure, which is super dangerous.
Or how about augured the relationship in because they chose to not quit instead of spending the time there, right?
Yeah.
So it's anyway. I'd like
it has
to
be balanced. It's a scale that if you don't pay attention to it, like everybody wants to focus on, like, how did you do that? You're able to do these things that I don't know anybody else who can do that. And like, okay, but let's take a little bit more of a holistic approach. Are the scales like this, or are we like here? For health as a human being, I think they should be relatively balanced. And I say that having probably lived the majority of my life completely out of balance with those scales.
That's interesting because how old are you?
45.
45. All right. So we're the same age.
You can call me sir because I outranked you and I'm older than you. It's your choice. You don't have to.
Okay.
But if you want to.
Then to your face, I will call you sir.
Yeah, it's your choice.
We'll have a conversation later about what
I don't call him sir.
But so a lot of us in the 40s, early 40s, who are thinking there's what I'm finding is that there's 2 people in our peer groups. There are those who are starting to think this way, and there are those who are self-medicating. So therefore, they are not thinking this way. And I'm trying to be in this first group because there are so many things professionally that I did that were really good. And that people look at the piece of paper and they're like, whoa, man, that's really incredible. How did you do that? That's amazing. And then I'm like, okay, well, let me tell you what the price was. You want to pay that price to do that? And suddenly people start having different opinions. One of the things I've been actually thinking about a lot lately is knowing what I know now, would I have done the things I did in the past?
You mean occupationally?
Yeah. Knowing what the price was going to be, knowing what it was going to cost me, would I have done it? I think I would have, absolutely. I would have been maybe a little smarter about it.
I would have
taken recovery a little more seriously.
I would have as well, but I would have made different decisions.
Yeah.
I would have been in less of a rush on the personal life side of the house.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a huge difference between the price and the cost, and I don't think.
But would you have been in less of a rush only because you knew you'd be alive today? So I didn't. We discussed losing guys early. Mm-hmm. I didn't think I would make it to 30. There's no way. None of my friends made it to 30.
Conversations like that in my 20s, but in your 20s, 30 is obscure.
Yeah, but then I made it to 30. I'm like, well, there's no way I'm making it to 40. And then next thing you knew, I was like, oh shoot, I'm pushing 40. I better get my act together. I better start figuring something out. So and I also would have realized earlier that what I do is not who I am.
Yeah.
And the 25-year-old version of me wants to kick the 45-year-old's ass for saying something like that. But what I do is not who I am. It's what I do, and it's important, but it's not my identity. And should I go choose to do something different, or should I move in a different direction? That's just the choice I'm making professionally. That has nothing to do with my identity. And so I think one of the things that service is very good at is surrounding you with people and then telling you that your identity is the hat on your head, right? The freaking logo on your chest, the tattoo, right? That's your identity. That's who you are. And without that, you are nothing. You don't have anything. And I think that's why you see so many people who, when they get drummed out, for whatever reason, have such a problem, because all of a sudden it's a true identity crisis.
Yeah.
And then they go one of two ways. They either are the old guy who's always coming around, irritating the new guys, and they are respectful to them, but at the end of the day, they're like, man, I don't want to end up like that guy. Or they self-medicate their way out of it, or they get it figured out. And unfortunately, I think the group that gets it figured out, like, you've done a great job. Glover's done a great job. Obviously, Evan done a great job. Will has done a great job. But there's so many people who don't. I've got a former boss of mine from the PJ teams. Just got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and he is got a death sentence. It's just a matter of time now.
Yeah.
That really sucks. That happens to a lot of soft dudes. But he's still contracting. He has been at war more years, almost, it seems like, than I have been out of my parents' house. Because that was just the identity. Just got to keep going. Just got to keep doing that. Keep doing the same thing. Keep doing the same thing. And okay, well, maybe he's not quite meeting the PT standard anymore. So all right, well now what can I do?
But they'll justify that even internally, not doctrinally, but internally. He has all this institutional knowledge. We need to keep him around. Put him into a training role. I think I was talking with somebody about this last week. Because there are a plethora, and I have no judgment on anybody in whatever career path they want to go, but they'll do a full 20 in the military, and then they will go and contract for some alphabet soup organization. And as you know, there's a variety of, there's a lot of places that they can land. And maybe it's because that was the easiest off-ramp for them, one job to another. You're going from being a military member to being a GS whatever. I don't even know how the fuck they do their hiring. Or maybe you're addicted to what we used to do overseas and you don't want to give it up.
Chasing the dragon.
Maybe you're scared of actually having to put together your own plan. Because if you think about it, SOF, we work with a lot of planners and we'll do some mission planning, but it's honestly like problem, solution, problem, solution, problem. You just, you know what I mean, at a lower level. But at some point, if you don't ever leave that tactical world and you're doing that in contracting, I think you get to a place where you can't interface with society anymore.
No.
Because, I've got a bunch of buddies up here in the Valley who are cops or first responders, law enforcement, and I've heard this from a bunch of them. It's really easy for them to get a skewed perspective of humanity.
Oh, yeah.
Because when the radio kicks off and their badge number or however they do their call signs, like, hey, you need to go over here. It's not because it's like somebody had unwrapped a great present at a birthday party and they're going there to celebrate. It's like fucking Joe dropped dead at the birthday party. You need to come either resuscitate him or put him on the gurney. Oh, hey, officer so-and-so, there's been a 7-car pileup and we need you to go start covering bodies up. Or a sex offender, a DV, whatever it may be. If that's all you see over and over again, and I've heard from so many officers and fire department people as well, because they're dealing with everybody, not everybody, but most people at their lowest moments, it jades them. So if you come from the world that we came from and then you just stay in that world over and over again, and let's say you go in when you're 18, you do your 20, so you're 38, and then you go fucking contract for a number 20, then you're almost 60. How are you ever going to interface back into the world? How are you going to maintain in the course of that an objective view of humanity? I mean, I don't know about you, but I certainly, the things that I saw overseas, and I'm not even talking about necessarily kinetic stuff, the way in both Iraq and Afghanistan, the way that I saw Iraqis and Afghanis treating each other and young boys and girls, you want to talk about complete erosion of what you think humanity is? Like, I'm actually glad that I was able to put my foot into that pond and not have it like develop an infection that came all the way up my leg and completely took over, and was able to get the fuck out of it, because holy shit.
Well, you also, so what are you trying to do as a soft guy? You think about it. Ultimately, you just distill it down to its irreducible minimum. You're trying to turn yourself into a robot. You're trying to make it so that you go into that room, you jump out of that plane, you do whatever thing that civilians do as a thrill seeker. You're trying to make sure that you are so good at it and so experienced at it, you don't have a response to that. You are just completely cognitively logical at all times. Yeah. Like you said, problem solution. Yeah. Problem solution. Problem solution.
You're looking to reduce things to a binary equation.
And then you bring that into your personal life. How's that go? I tell you, it didn't go so well for me.
Didn't go well for me either.
And one of my good friends and a mentor is a former XO CAG, and he, left JSOC as an 06, and he told me, he's like, Nick, and you go into his house, and he takes the whole "I love me" wall thing to an absolute extreme. He was a commander of the Golden Knights for a little while, right? So he's got like
he has "I love me" rooms.
Oh no, like every single wall, right? Every single wall, and he deserves it. I mean, he accomplished more in his first 5 years than I probably did my entire career. But he will fully tell you, he's like, Nick, I sacrificed a lot to be there, and I have some big regrets around the sacrifices I made around my family and my relationships around me. So part of that interface, though, I think is, yes, you get jaded, but also you get so good at controlling your emotional response to things that you no longer have an emotional response, right? You really bring those blinders in. Ophthalmologists will talk about how if a child, perfectly good eye, right, and if they have a perfectly good eye, and you cover that up, they'll actually lose sight in that eye. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that their brain no longer understands how to process that signal, so it no longer works. How is that any different? Our emotional response to the world becomes, and one of the things that when I talk to other SOF folks, because I end up doing a lot of mentoring and getting a lot of those calls, and almost every single one of them, when they first leave, has a problem, and that's that they do not understand how to experience joy. They don't really experience much sadness, and look at that as a good thing, right? I mean, how many? Yeah, you shed a couple of tears at the first guy's funeral, but
you're stone-faced by the end of it.
Dozens later, you're not, Amazing Grace on Bagpipes just doesn't choke you up the way that it used to, right? Because you might have lost a guy, and the next night you're going back out. Right?
Yeah.
And it might have been a super close friend, and nothing else, a teammate, and you're going back out, and you're like, oh man, that really sucks.
You might lose a guy on a target and have to flex to another one.
Yeah. That's I never had to do that, but I know that happens in the JSOC community constantly.
Yeah. The last time you might see somebody is they're getting carted onto a medevac, helicopter dead.
Yeah. It's like, oh, the flag finally came off their back and now it's on their face. And so you learn to adapt and overcome through those situations. right, to ignore and override. But then you get into the civilian world, and suddenly you're faced with all that stuff because you're not so busy anymore. There's not a target to continually drive towards. So now you have the past catching up with you, and you have people throwing you a surprise birthday party, and you're just pissed off that they surprised you. I mean, how do you deal with that? You know what I mean? So that's where, and then they're like, well, look at this guy. He's such a prick. They're like, well, no, like that guy's struggling with some serious demons. He just doesn't know how to fight that enemy because he's been training it his entire life.
I also think that the occupation may select just, again, the standards and the evolutions.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might select for people that have a slightly more muted emotional response. I would say that I do. I don't have very high highs, and I don't have very low lows. Sometimes I have them, but most of the time I feel like I'm pretty baseline, and people have told me my whole life, like, you're hard to read.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I was like that before I came in. I don't really remember like 16 to 18-year-old Andy that well. I mean, I know what the fuck I was doing, but I would have to ask people from that phase of my life. But I do think there is an essence of that being trained in. But I also think that it's something about the pipeline that nowhere in the criteria to become a SEAL does it say that, right? Like, you're not going to find that on paper. You're not going to see anywhere where it's written down, we are looking for people who have a shallower emotional response. But if I look at, like, Bud seems super chaotic. Rewarded for one behavior on Monday, punished for the same behavior on Tuesday. You can do no right or wrong.
Got to keep you on your toes.
Got to keep you on your toes. But if you have a little bit more of a muted emotional response, you don't really give a fuck as much.
No, you just don't care.
That's what I'm saying. So it's like those people who don't actually care, and you're like, whatever, dude. You right now as an instructor are a roadblock for me achieving my goals.
Mm-hmm.
And the roller coaster is less, a higher or a lower high and a lower low. It might actually tool you a little bit better to deal with that. You know what I mean?
So I think so. So I'm working on researching that very theory. So, and I think a lot of it comes down to childhood trauma. So when you look at your special operators and your entrepreneurs specifically, Steve Jobs, childhood trauma, Elon Musk, significant childhood trauma, like really rough stuff. Myself, pretty significant childhood trauma. If you go down the road of individuals, you start to see both on the entrepreneur side and on the soft side, which entrepreneurship, as you know, is a lot of pain.
Yeah.
It's different than
That's why
the
a
soft
lot of
side.
soft guys become
Entrepreneurs.
entrepreneurial, though.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, adversity? That's fine. That's just motivation for me. Oh,
Yeah.
I failed? Fucking sweet. On to the next.
Cool. I learned.
Yeah.
You know?
And nothing you can do can stop them. So
Yeah.
they'll be able to achieve these things, and then their life's a fucking train wreck. But again.
Yeah. Well, that's so when you start looking at that, I heard a interview, I think it was on the 20 VC podcast with Harry Stebbins, where he was interviewing one of the partners at Sequoia, right? So arguably one of the best, top 5 venture capital firms the world has ever seen, right? I mean, billions and billions, tens of billions under management, maybe hundreds of billions, I don't know, but the top of the game. And he was saying that one of the things that he was looking for in entrepreneurs were people who had significant childhood hardships, he called them. And so he would start asking entrepreneurs about their childhoods. And he would find that entrepreneurs who had at least a member of the team in a senior leadership position, somebody who was responsible for pushing through, which obviously in entrepreneurship is just a complete exercise in like not quitting that day.
Yeah.
And going and getting the cushy job with the good benefits and the good salary and all the vacation time. He was specifically looking for somebody who had a hardship in childhood that they had to overcome. So very interesting. I don't know if that's true or not in the soft world, but I think back and I think about the alcohol-fueled team room conversations that would happen sometimes, right, during downtime and whatnot.
Maybe in the PJ world. SEALs,
Yeah.
we didn't push drinking at all.
Never.
Used to be you couldn't make E7 until you had at least 2 Deweys.
Yeah.
Now it's the fastest ejection seat out of the military. Like, see you later, buddy.
Yeah, how did that happen? Yeah, but just hearing guys like talk, and guys, every once in a while kind of open up about, stuff. And one guy's talking about how his dad used to beat him, bloody with his Tonka trucks. And you're like, dude, that is some rough stuff. And he's talking about it like it's a nothing.
It's funny you brought that up. So I had Sean Buck Rogers on the podcast. And the very first episode we did, he dove very deep into his childhood. Mm-hmm. And we're talking like stories of him running barefoot through the desert of like Arizona, trying to escape the environment that he was in. I think there was his mom might have been ODing at that time, but like trying to get his way to his grandparents' house. And it fits right in the model of what you're saying. And then on the other side of that, like, dude, I won the fucking lottery with my parents. So
I won the lottery with my parents, but I was adopted. So the first 3 years, which is where your brain gets set, were pretty rough.
Do you remember the first 3 years of your life?
I remember. So very interesting.
Because I have a struggle remembering what I had for dinner last night. If you can remember your first 3 years, I'm going to be amazed.
So TBI is very real. I actually don't remember much. I actually don't even remember much of PJ school. Yeah, I got a couple helicopter crashes and then dropped on my head on a free fall training accident. Actually, eggshelled a Gentex. Landed on a runway.
It's not easy to do.
Super awesome. And of course, back in those days, it was like, shake it off, you're fine.
You got an 800 milligram Motrin.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly
probably
what
a Ziploc baggie full.
That I gave myself. I went home. So it was Friday jumps. So of course it was followed by beverages, libations.
Yeah.
And I drove home Friday afternoon. I was supposed to meet some guys out at a bar from the team. Didn't make it. Of course, nobody calls and says, "Hey, didn't Nick just eggshell a Gentex?"
Yeah,
right. Did 2 more jumps after that. Followed up with my own medications.
As you're probably dry heaving in your bathroom due to concussion syndrome.
I fell asleep on my couch. I went home, threw up a couple of times. Fell asleep on my couch Friday afternoon. Woke up midday Sunday. Was right back at work on Monday. So, yeah, that's not good for your head.
No.
So I was seeing my neurologist is Dr. Amen Clinics. So soft dudes listening, they're absolutely awesome. Did all the brain scans and he was like, that's interesting. What happened here? And he's pointing to this brain scan. And there's like this big spot on the top of my head where there's no blood flow. And I was like, I can tell you exactly what happened there. Because I have a memory of hitting the deck. I have a vague memory of the next 2 jumps because I knew I should not be jumping. But hey, let's not let that stop us.
Yeah, I don't want to be viewed as a quitter.
Exactly. But I don't really remember the next couple of weeks. But everything before that, super fuzzy. Super fuzzy. My brother-in-law, I was talking to him the other day. He was only guy my sister ever dated. He was around a lot in high school. No memory of it. No memory of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's so really interesting. So now take that and say, okay, well, do you have a fuzzy childhood memories because you're just getting older, or is the repeated traumatic brain injury from overpressure, from, all the different things that we experience, does that just slowly erasing parts of your memory? Super interesting.
I don't know the answer to any of those, but it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah. I've been trying to do a lot of research on it, just trying to understand what's going on in my own head. Right.
I find that when I find topics that I'm worried about or concerned about, the best thing to do is not to research them and hope for the best. Like if I go down this rabbit hole of symptoms and things that can lead to TBIs, I'm going to be looking in the mirror a lot, so I'll just skip it. On to the next. So
let me counter that, though. What's been super helpful for me is knowing what's going on, and I've been getting a lot better. A lot better. I mean, orders of magnitude better. I remember it was a couple of years ago when, and even my wife was like, we got to have a talk. My daughter's standing in the kitchen, and she's holding a pair of tongs. And she goes, "Daddy, what are these?" She's a toddler.
We're talking salad tongs?
Yeah. All right. And I was looking at him. I was like, that's a good question. And I thought about what the name of that instrument was, that tool was, for probably a good 6 or 7 hours until I finally was like, tongs! You would have thought I freaking, was a caveman discovering fire. And then I've always been somebody who's been fairly well known for his memory, verbal fluidity, and that just really started to get so bad that not only I noticed it, but people around me were starting to notice. And so I was like, all right, time to get this figured out. So I go see the AMAN clinics, and they start running all their tests, and they pump you full of all this stuff, and you're in the freaking CT scan tube, and it's sitting there just bzz, 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 right? And so of course that's super awesome to be sitting in there after taking all those tests, which make you feel like an absolute idiot.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, like, I know this is going to be terrible. I just know, because we tend to catastrophize everything. So we get the results back, and it was about a week later, and I'm on a Zoom call with the neurologist, and he's like, well, the bad news is, but no, he said the good news is, you're going to live. And I was like, well, that's actually, like, if you're saying that's good news, like, that's not great news. Good news would be like, hey man, nothing wrong with you. Yeah. Some bacteria. Here's
good, Nick.
Yeah, right.
Looking
Everything's good. He's like, the bad news is like the condition you had is fatal. You were probably looking at being in a home by the time you were 55, 60 years old. You'd be in memory care. They would probably diagnose you with early onset dementia or some type of early onset Alzheimer's. He's like, but it's actually, traumatic brain injury. He said the good news is that we can probably bring you back around. He said it'll take 4 to 5 years. You're gonna have to be super disciplined, but he said unless you can get a hyperbaric chamber and put it in your garage. So I priced that out. Turns out that's a little out of my price range. Turns out you're also not allowed to have a hyperbaric chamber in a residential neighborhood.
That's assuming you tell them. Whatever the hell you want to in your house, as long as nobody knows.
How are you going to get one in and installed?
Pieces? I mean, do I have to solve these
one
problems
piece
for
at a
you?
time?
Yeah. Amazon's busy today, guys. Don't worry about these boxes. So when they say they can bring you back around, how?
So your brain is plastic, right? So
I don't think my brain's made out of plastic.
Oh, mine is definitely made out of, oh, dude, as much, come on.
I mean, I'm not an MD, but I'm pretty sure in my skull is not plastic.
Or is it?
Could be.
So neuroplasticity is a very real thing. You can, I was always told growing up that you cannot regrow brain cells, right? Once a part of the brain is damaged, like it's damaged, there's nothing you can do about that. And it turns out that's just not true. Your brain can reroute signals. Your brain can use parts of the brain to walk that were not meant for walking. It can, your brain is, the plasticity of your brain is such that your brain can pretty much use, with the exception of the midbrain, right? The part that makes your heart beat and makes you breathe. The rest of your brain can pretty much be repurposed with varying levels of difficulty to override the parts of the brain that are damaged.
How? Like, how are they doing this for you?
So drugs.
Like weed, cocaine. What are we talking?
Yeah. So it turns out that's exactly what we want to stay away from. That's the self-medicating thing.
Okay.
Right. That doesn't.
I'm
work.
not judging. I'm just.
So they've got me on modafinil, which is an insanely expensive drug. They've got me on just a handful of like a vitamin cocktail, basically, but everything's at the right doses that they need specific for brain health. There's some adaptogens in there. I have to take a handful of pills every morning, but it's working pretty well. And then there's other things that happen that we always just say, well, maybe that's just the way I am. Because keep in mind, you don't have the ability to sense your brain, right? So if I say, tap your left finger, you can tap your left finger. If I say, throb the, right part of the frontal lobe of your brain, you have no ability to sense your brain, right? Your brain has no pain receptors, no receptors. So you cannot sense what's happening except through emotion.
Through emotion,
which is the very thing that we spent all of our time learning to not deal with. So a lot of, I think, the soft community, and this gets into like larger portions of operator syndrome and things like that, but a lot of the soft community is hyper attuned and hyper aware of their bodies, right? Like we spend, I mean, that was our instrument. That was the tool of our job. So we took that very seriously. And we took cognitive performance extremely seriously, but we didn't take cognitive sensation very seriously. So the way that you sense what's going on in your head, right, is, they say like all your feeling comes from your heart. Well, that heavy sense in your chest has nothing to do with your heart, right? Your heart is a muscle that moves blood around. I mean, it just has nothing to do with your heart. It has to do with your brain creating a sensation in your body. So think of it this way: like people who have phantom pain, right? They lose a limb. They don't have a right foot, yet their right foot hurts. That's all in the head. That's right. That is in their brain. So you don't go, oh well, here's some Motrin for the pain in your right foot. The right foot's not there anymore. It's like, all right, let's figure out cognitively what's happening. Yeah. So your emotions are the link to the health of your brain. You're pissed off all the time, brain's not healthy, right? Your, as you said, your law enforcement officers, your first responders, your soft guys, you're jaded against humanity. Well, your brain's not healthy, right? You've turned those things off, because how can you be jaded against humanity and yet at the same time go home and look at your 3-year-old daughter who thinks that you hung the moon and be jaded against humanity? So we're calling it something that it's not. So on the brain health side, we as a community have to start making it okay for other guys, and other men in the community to have moments of weakness and just be like, hey dude, like you seem really pissed off a lot. How's your brain health? So think about
they're
that.
going to say, fine, fuck
I'm
you.
Fine. I think at 35 they will, but at 45, I think they start thinking things differently. Because at some
imagine if you
point,
could get them to action it at 35
or 25.
Yeah.
Right. Imagine if we started taking brain health as serious as we take physical health. Well, all of a sudden, how many marriages did you just save? How many lives did you just save from guys who otherwise would have ate their clock? Right?
Do you think that the government or the special operations communities are actually interested in knowing?
Nope.
That's what I'm saying. Like, let's say that
just like the NFL and football.
Let's say that they start this and that you start getting a baseline, and halfway through a career, 5, 6, half dozen deployments in, all the symptoms are there for somebody who's going to develop early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, and you go to the person like, listen, you have to stop. They're going to say, fuck you. And this is, I don't speak for the community, obviously, so I'm not sure whether or not they would be interested in it or not, but it leads to deeper and more long-term conversations. Like, how do we do this job without breaking the people? Or is this a job that if you enter into this profession, you are going to be broken to a degree, and then you need to be upfront about the actual cost of this. The price being your time, the cost being you're a vegetable at 55 or 60-year-old.
But I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think so. As an example, I eggshell a Gentex on a training jump. My supervisors, my team chief, should have said, "Oh man, you're obviously extreme risk for concussion. So what we're going to do is you're sleeping in the you're sleeping in the team house tonight. We've got a protocol for this. This is what we do. There's some drugs that you can give people up front that mitigate the effects of concussion by like 90%. In children, it's like 98%. So we're gonna follow a protocol." Just like if
there's
you
another section to that, and that's you as the individual who eggshelled it, going, "Hey, I'm fucked up."
Right.
You got to have both.
Yeah, absolutely. But to say, "Hey guys, like here's the deal." So if you roll your ankle on a run, you run through it. If you break your ankle on a run, you don't run through it because you don't have the choice.
Yeah.
So if there is a physical injury that's like, "Oh man, that guy's got a bone sticking out of his leg. It's not supposed to be like that." We have a protocol to fix that.
Tougher with enclosed brain injury though, because you know what I mean. It's not a bone sticking out.
But if we start, I know towards the end of my career, guys started going to the chiropractor. Right. It was like preventative maintenance on the body that did not involve just drinking copious amounts of alcohol so that you could get to sleep through the pain. That started to become more mainstream. And guys started talking about guys started traveling with those eStim, little units and stuff. Actually, one of my guys get wrapped up in Pakistan because they thought it was a bomb. That was hilarious, by the way.
They don't look too dissimilar.
So they started traveling with that. You'd see guys in the team room with the little freaking roller sticks and rolling their IT bands, right? So preventative maintenance, physical preventative maintenance, became much more mainstream. It wasn't that way in Vietnam. You didn't need that. Just drink more. So I think that if we as a community started to wrap around each other and say, hey man, how's the family? Oh man, things aren't good. Oh really? How's your brain? Because maybe the reason your wife is always pissed off at you is because you're always pissed off at everything.
Yeah, and maybe you shouldn't have married a stripper.
Yeah, well, there's that.
Yeah.
This is what my wife calls the course. She's like, all the training you guys get, why don't they teach you these basic life skills? Like, well, because then it wouldn't make for very good stories.
Yeah, and we're too busy learning other things that are completely irrelevant once you leave military service.
Yeah, which
is why maybe some people just fuck, I got to stick with what I know.
Yeah, but that's where I think is, and the military is never going to do it because, and I do mean never going to do it. I hate to sound that pessimistic, but where's the incentive? What's their incentive to do it? There isn't one.
They're not tooled to do it either.
Keep the racetrack keep the race car on the track. So maybe they can get it into the preventative stuff a little bit more.
But look at your initial pipeline. Navy boot camp, 8 weeks long.
Sure.
Leaving the military, TAPS program, I think it was scheduled for a week. The guy let me leave after 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just an example of,
You went to it?
I did.
Oh.
I had to get a signature at Balboa Hospital, which was directly across the parking lot from where the TAPS place was.
Go. Nice.
I was just multitasking.
Sure.
Yeah.
I get it.
No, I think I had to go to get my name on the paper because they had to stamp my discharge paperwork as part of the checkout process.
Sure.
Yeah. But 8 weeks versus 2 hours.
Yeah.
The military is not tooled to invest as much time in you when you are getting out as they are when you come in.
So we have to do it. So that's part of the reason I have these conversations with people is because I hit a point where I suddenly had to go, whoa, wait a minute, something's wrong. Now you ask 90% of the people who know me, my wife could obviously tell something was off. But you ask most of the people who know me, they're like, oh no, Nick, freaking, he's rocking it. He's doing great. And boy, if they only knew.
Yeah.
So to be able to say, hey, look, like this is a very real thing. It's fixable because no one wants to hear about the death sentence, right? They just want to hear about, oh, I got a problem. Cool. What's the solution to that problem? Right back to the way that we're trained. Well, the solution to that problem is you go talk to these experts. You go talk to, you do these things. You be disciplined about this. Oh, disciplined about, following a procedure. I can do that.
I've heard that theory once or twice.
That I can do. That my training from the past that created all this is actually what sets me up for success to beat it all. So here I am. I'd say about 8 months ago, I was at the absolute lowest I've ever been in my life. Like the physical pain was intense, and it wasn't from all my past injuries. I don't know how many surgeries you've had. I've had
0.
A number.
0.
Seriously?
Never been put under, never had a surgery.
How is that possible? Clearly. Dude, you win. You win.
Luck? I
don't know. But so the physical pain was super intense. I just thought it was like, oh, I'm just getting older and I've freaking been broken up a lot. And then cognitive stuff was starting to happen. And that's when I was like, well, wait a minute. That's not who I am. And then I started to notice it. And then my wife started to notice it. And then it was, oh, okay, this is a problem. Well, let me see if I can fix it. And so what do? You look for experts. Started looking for experts. Read this book called Concussion Rescue. Super, super easy book to read. And I was like, oh, this guy seems like he knows what he's doing. Turns out it's written by one of the top neurologists in the world. Okay. It turns out he has a clinic in Bellevue, Washington. Well, that's a 1 hour flight away from here.
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Let's get on a plane and go see what they have to say. And so that's just kind of the process. And now they've put me on essentially a regimen that gets me to feeling better than I have felt in the last 8-9 years. Because I think a lot of times when you're in the fight, so to speak, you're either in the fight or you're training for the fight. Like one of those two things are happening. And I mean, how many guys do you know who are competitive shooters because they wanted to be better at their job? Competitive skydivers. Competitive
shooters that I know. Yeah. Same thing.
Because they wanted to be better at their job. I mean, the guys I know who were the best skydivers on my team were all the guys who had a almost died incident, and they said, I'm going to make sure that never happens again. And so they started jumping on the weekends. Nothing will turn somebody, nothing will make somebody start taking their gun skills more seriously than a combat situation where they missed and their buddy picked up the shot. Right. I mean, it's just is.
Yeah.
So we as a community, I would say, again, I'm painting with a broom here, but I think it's fairly accurate to say that we will overcorrect. Really, anytime we're given a problem that we need to solve, we're fine. We just say, fine. Not only am I going to learn to do that, I'm going to learn to be the best at it.
Yeah, I'll learn how to master it, or the best that I possibly can.
So we as a community need to say, all right, hey, there's a problem with your brain. This is what it looks like. The more I learn, the more I think it's pretty much impossible for anybody to have gotten out of a soft training pipeline without some bit of a traumatic brain injury. And let's keep in mind, traumatic brain injury doesn't mean I crushed in your skull with a hammer. Traumatic brain injury is skull crushed in with a hammer on and you're a vegetable, and 0.5%. And everything in between, right? It's that spectrum.
An inflatable boat bouncing on your head as you were running along through the sand for weeks at a time.
How about this? The overpressure issues, right? Where the military all knows about breacher syndrome and how that happens. There's never heavy breachers around it, but it's not like I was getting the same volume as those guys.
You don't have to be a breacher to eat that shit.
In fact, usually you're not.
Yeah.
And so, especially you're number one man holding the corner that they're freaking they're getting behind, you're the one eating it. So when you look at the overpressure issues, though, right, and that the way that those pressure waves travel through hydraulics, of which your brain is just a big freaking bowl of jello, we think of breaching. Now let's think about CQB with the Rangers, right? So And I'm probably screwing up the numbers here. I'm sure somebody will let us know in the comments.
Oh, of course.
So a standard military M4, I think, is a 16-inch barrel.
I have no idea. I was never a gun guy.
Yeah, I think it's a 16-inch barrel. That has something along the lines of, I want to say it's like 14 pounds per square inch is the PSI coming out the end, right? And it doesn't affect you that much if you're behind it. But if you're in front of it, obviously you felt that. You very much feel the difference. Well, now take that down to a 10.5-inch 416 unsuppressed. Well,
Maybe
now,
a little B. Myers flash suppressor out there just fucking blasting it.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Maybe you forgot your ear pro.
Yeah. Never. Or how about that Ranger who cooks off a belt fed on a target? And you're, for me, down in a corner working on some guy, and they're returning a fire out a freaking window, but of course they're offset from the window as they should be.
Yeah.
And so you're just getting all that concussive force. So I believe the number is 13 pounds per square inch is what it takes to make a micro tear in your brain, right? So which is a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
It's a small one. And normally that wouldn't be a big deal.
But if you layer it over a career.
Yeah, but you laid it over the aggregate of just one deployment, right? Because we had the hot deployments and the cold deployments, right? The ones that were so boring, you were really hoping something would happen, and then
those
the
are
ones
just times to catch up on TV shows.
Yeah, and then the ones where things were so hot, you were kind of like, that boring deployment wasn't so bad. So just one deployment, but then all the training, right? So you look at that all in aggregate,
Well,
and
don't leave out free fall jumps with dynamic and hard openings.
Yeah.
You go to the bundle course. Every one of your openings is both dynamic and hard, to include the landings.
Never did that because I watched you guys who did, and I was like, you know what? It just doesn't appeal to me. Like, none of those guys are hitting the ground going like, woo!
I watch guys blow every CL in their knee just on the opening shock, because the bundle is underneath you. And as you release, it's a tandem system, so there's a drogue behind you that's slowing you down to about 120. As you release it, there's this moment where the drogue is deflating as your parachute is coming off. So you actually accelerate a little bit, and you'd watch slack develop in between the tandem master and the bundle.
Uh-oh.
And then as the parachute opens, it's like a top and it spins, and people's legs would, like when I would release it, I'm like balled up, legs tucked up behind me. But I watched people had their leg would interact with the tandem tether, and every fucking tendon in their leg just nuked.
I much smaller. Remember the big jump equipment bags?
Yeah,
that came out. Eagle made them.
Yeah,
I think it was like late '90s, early 2000s, and those things may as well have been freaking bundles.
They were essentially bundles. They were just on you sideways and strapped to you. At least with a bundle, if it got Western, it's like, hello, red handle, ka-tink, see you later.
Yeah, those things. Now, especially when you were jumping them rear mounted. I mean, you're basically flying like this the whole time.
Yeah,
and so we were learning how to jump those, and of course, to my team leaders, that meant let's see how much crap we can get in them. So we're jumping in Avon Park, Florida, and coming in standard. It's hanging below me, no big deal, and my bundle hits, my ruck if you want to call it that. It hits and gets caught between these like two relatively large rocks. At which point, I rapidly accelerated to the deck.
Oh, probably just pendulum.
Joe, just face first.
Yes.
Which is why when I was getting all these CT scans, the doctor's looking at him, and he's like, how many times you broken your nose? I was like, you know what? I'm pretty lucky. I don't think I've ever broken my nose. He was like, really? I was like, yeah, you get punched or whatever, you get the huge rush of blood or gush of blood. It's like, yeah, it's never happened to me. He's like, well, looking at the CT scan, he's like, your nose passages look like an Indy racetrack. And I'm going to say you've broken it for sure 3 times, maybe 4 to 5. And I'm like, oh, freaking, I didn't know I'd ever broken my nose. I knew I'd had some serious facial trauma, but it was kind of one of those like, straighten it out and
800 milligram Motrin.
Yeah. Take the vitamin M and keep going. Right? Vitamin M solves everything.
Fucking horse pills.
So anyway, you start adding all that stuff up over an aggregate of a career, and you're just getting farther and farther and farther on that traumatic brain injury spectrum. So fast forward, I'm talking to a PhD neuroscientist out of one of Two Bears companies, and he was explaining to me how the TBI actually creates structural changes in your brain. The symptoms of that can be things that mimic PTSD. Mm-hmm. Like I can say for definitively, I do not have any PTSD. Super lucky. There are guys who do. Doesn't make them any weaker. I've got my own issues. But I don't have any PTSD. But if I were to go talk to a counselor, they'd be like, oh, it sounds like you have some PTSD and depression issues. It's like, well, no, actually I don't. I have brain structure changes, but they don't know that.
Well, it's because there are, I believe, 13 recognized symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and 11 of them also apply to TBI. I was having conversations when I was out at NICO with the psychs and shrinks because I was curious. I was fascinated about how they make that, and they actually were very open with saying, there's so much overlap that it's almost easier and more accurate just to put on their PTSD, if you want to use that, just / TBI, because there's such an overlap. 11 of the 13 apply to both.
But treatments are so different. So you get some vets who go in and they're like, hey, PTS, I'm having a hard time sleeping. And maybe they actually don't. Maybe, but they say, oh, well, we're going to put you on some SRIs, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We're going to put you on these different drugs that they normally would prescribe to somebody with, say, depression. And then it doesn't work. And then that guy loses hope.
Yeah.
And versus saying, and that can actually make the TBI issues worse versus saying, oh, we basically just need to reroute blood flow to your brain. because there's parts of your brain that don't have blood flow anymore because those parts of your brain are damaged. So we're going to route blood flow around them, and this is how we're going to do that. And it's really simple. It's everything from actually paying attention to the way you feel, which is something we've never done, to our, as we've talked about, professionally that's been great, but to our personal detriment.
/ demise.
Yeah. So actually paying attention to the way you feel. Actually paying attention to cognitive issues, and then medicating for that very specific problem. And then there's exercises that they've also got me doing. Think of it as brain training, but it doesn't really work that way. It's more like lights and colors type thing, that then help your brain call for oxygen, so blood flow, and then your brain, being the magical freaking wonder that it is,
figures it out.
Yeah, manages to route around those damaged parts to get blood flow to the parts that are supposed to be working. Super cool.
Did they recommend that you follow the 9 ancestral tenets?
I have no idea what that even is.
Where have you been, dude? I'm trying to talk shit about the Liver King.
Oh. What is this?
The Liver King.
Oh, that dude. Yeah. No, I do not. Yeah, so that's the guy who was trying to say he was all natural, right?
I was going to say, if you had to fucking put every penny of your life savings and every penny that your children would ever make on natural or not, what would you go with?
Completely natural, because he's a biological human who's obviously standing there made of cells, so clearly natural.
No, it's...
But as far as the enhancements we're talking about,
yeah.
I would say I had dudes on my team who looked just like that guy.
Yeah, no shit. And they also had a fucking pharmacology in their team room locker.
Because I would be the one who had to treat them for the infections they would get from the injections.
Yeah. I don't know. It's...
Yeah, no.
Yeah, neither here nor there. It's... people, I think, sometimes just want to be fooled. I think they want to take the easier route out. But I recommend that you start eating only organ meat and doing cold plunge and whatever. I don't know any of the other ancestral tenets.
Very clearly throwing up big, heavy Atlas stones.
That dude is
standing in
45.
Standing in lakes with spears.
Nick, that's a 45-year-old man.
Uh-huh. Again, dudes on my team who look just like him.
Oh, I know.
In their late 30s and early 40s. And they'd always be like, of course, you're ribbing them. They're like, what, dude? I just take a lot of protein and work out harder than you. I'm like, yes.
I have never seen anybody take so much protein right in their ass cheek.
It's the new injectable form.
Fuck. Yeah, that's wild, man. How long is... So you're saying like a 4 to 5 year protocol?
Yep. 4 to 5 years of very disciplined living. So don't drink, nothing. Not that there's anything wrong with drinking. I just don't have the gray matter to spare. Well, people can drink if they want to drink, and not if they don't want to. But just don't ignore the. Yeah, just know what it's doing. Yeah, just know what it's doing to your body. I actually don't have a problem with people doing largely whatever the hell they want, as long as they're making an educated choice. Yeah, as long as they know, what they're getting into. This isn't without consequence. Yeah, and that's fine as long as you know what the consequences are. You can choose to. To have my wife can have a glass of wine with dinner. She has the gray matter to spare. I don't. It's a different choice, right? Yeah. And so, so very, very clean eating, right? Trying to be more disciplined about PT, just because, especially the cardio stuff, which is stuff I hate. But hey. Really good cognitive therapy there, basically. You could try going to jiu-jitsu more than 4 times in 5 months. There is a cardio component of that, I assure you. There is the work travel component that gets in the way of that. So, what are you talking about? You work up in Whitefish. Yeah. I was just looking, I traveled, 30 trips last year. 90% of those were counter human trafficking related. And so speaking of human trafficking, man, why haven't you stopped it yet? So there's a scale issue that we're working on. Yeah. Is really what it comes down to. We started DeliverFund with the thesis that we were going to essentially provide man hours to law enforcement. I'm going to hire a bunch of super smart analysts, give them the tools they need, help law enforcement. and we'll fill in the gap. Well, it turns out the gap was a little bit wider than we thought. It wasn't so much of a gap as it was a canyon. And so then we started automating data collection to make it actually easier on our analysts to handle the workload. Well, it became pretty clear that wasn't really going to solve the problem either. These are all micro steps, but really what we needed to do was we needed to move the needle on the problem. So that's when about 5 years ago, I really started getting into understanding machine learning, understanding how do you build algorithms, how do you build training data sets, who are the experts you need to go to, and how do you make systems that become predictive. So the one cool thing about the human trafficking fight, which we never quite had in the terrorism or counter-narcotics fight, is terrorists they're not telling you what they're going to do tomorrow.
That'd be the antithesis of them being
Traffickers
successful.
do. They tell you what they're going to do tomorrow.
Meaning they're advertising their product? Like
Yeah,
where it's
they advertise their product online. And if they're moving across I-90 and they are in Billings, and tomorrow they're going to be in 2 days, they're going to be in, the Bakken oil field region. Well, they will put those advertisements up before they leave Billings, and they will be booking dates, so to speak, sessions for that girl.
I was gonna say, that's a polite way to put it.
Yeah, the whole time. Trying to keep it family friendly. So they'll be booking the whole way. So when they get there, they're already turning girls out to customers, already making money. So it's just a matter of following that footprint. And as soon as these traffickers, they book a girl out, they'll pull her advertisement down, because they obviously, the longer they leave that advertisement up there, the higher the risk of law enforcement finding them or figuring out what's going on.
Yeah.
So they create these advertisements under the guise of prostitution, and then they book the girl out, and then they pull down the advertisements. So we started building programs to collect those advertisements. Essentially, think of it as just taking screenshots, but at a very, very high volume. Started building programs to do that. But now we have this huge noise issue, right? We haven't quite gotten the signal we want, because there is real...
Because you're capturing so much.
Yeah, there is real commercial sex activity in there, right? Prostitution, things like that. When I started this work, I thought 80-20 rule applied. It was probably about 80% prostitution, 20% human trafficking. Now I'm starting to think otherwise. It's actually about 80% human trafficking, 20% prostitution. It is happening at a scale that is almost incomprehensible. So, and it's all because it's being done on the front-facing internet where customers can find it. So you have
when you say they're posting ads, where?
There's 42 different websites. I'm not going to say the names of them, just because I don't want to drive traffic to them. But there are people listening to this podcast who know exactly what I'm talking about. And go ahead, visit those websites. The more you do, the more your information is in our system. The more you're just rolling the dice on whether or not you're going to get caught. And so within these 42 different websites, which is where the source data comes in. So within data, you're always looking for the best fidelity data you can get, right? So the cleanest signal. So there's aggregators. So think of like Craigslist. Craigslist is an aggregator of data of people who want to sell things. But the best data is the person who wants to sell it, right? They put up a picture of a shiny iPhone, but once you actually see it, you're like, wait a minute, man, that's a little like from like 9 years ago. It's not the same one that you advertised. So you always want to get the cleanest data that you can get, which means you need to go to the source. So our analysts, folks like Kara, have been tracking down the actual source data, which means where does the trafficker put that information into the internet, right? Where's the first place they do it?
Like the actual physical location?
Well, no. So the
mechanism.
actual mechanism on the internet, right? So the think of it as the web address, right? I can buy books off of Amazon, but all that is doing is aggregating bookstores. I can also go downstairs to a bookstore and buy that same thing, right? I can probably buy a gi out of this martial arts studio downstairs.
You could 100% buy a gi from the karate studio.
There, yes, 100%. I could also buy one on Amazon, right?
Yes.
But Amazon doesn't just have warehouses of keys. They're just the middleman.
They do have warehouses of a lot of shit, though.
Yeah. Well, increasingly, but they didn't start there.
No, but they are definitely. I knew a guy who was early on in Amazon, and he was talking about it's just unbelievable, these cavernous spaces, and they're looking at the data of what is ordered, and they're
cutting out the middleman.
I mean, because I'm assuming that the middleman is still getting paid for the product, but they are housing it, and it allows this quicker turnaround time. So that's what they're positioning it under. But they are getting into the warehouse business.
Oh, for sure. But you can't do that with people. You can have just warehouses of people hanging out, right?
I mean, some people would disagree with you. I'm not saying that those are good people, but there are people on Earth who'd be like, "What are you talking about?" You absolutely can.
Well, you've got to feed them.
Yeah,
you got to water them. You know, they need to use the bathroom. Those are the basic three. And which means people are harder to manage than a bunch of books I can just put on the shelf. And if I sell them in 1 year or 5 years, it doesn't really matter. So the aggregators, the data aggregators are taking from these 42 different websites, and they're sucking that information in to essentially try to draw customers so they can sell advertisements, right? So, okay, well, those aggregators, and there's just half a dozen of them, where are they getting their data? And then are any of those aggregators, and where are they getting their data? So when you think of when you try to sell something online, where does that product get put into the internet, right? Which means that there's a human being on a keyboard manually putting that information in somewhere. You get it down to its irreducible minimum. So where is that happening? There's 42 different places that happens, predominantly within the commercial sex industry, and we are gathering from almost all 42. By the end of Q2 next year, our engineers will have all 42, which means that we're collecting data at a scale never been done before. Well, what happens when you get a lot of data? You start to see bright spots on the map.
Yeah.
But you do have to go through it because you end up with a lot of noise in there as well. So we started building machine learning algorithms that detect, I call it a human trafficking signal detector. So there's the difference between prostitution and human trafficking really comes down to about 32 different indicators. Those are primarily visual, although, a certain percentage of them are written as well. And I don't want to get too into the details, just assuming, traffickers listening. So within those 32 different indicators, something that is prostitution related has 4 of those indicators. Something that's human trafficking related has 27 of those indicators. There's not a lot of in between.
Yeah.
Well, now that we know what those 32 different indicators are and what the weights on those indicators need to be,
you can start parsing shit out.
Yeah. Now we can just tell the computers what to look for. Well, that means you got to be able to tell the computers what to look for, which when you talk about machine learning and AI, really what you're talking about, and unless you start getting into the really high level stuff, the stuff that Lex Friedman and those guys are doing, right? Like robots that will build themselves into the robots they need so they can build more robots.
Yeah, those are
right?
the robots that are gonna
take over the world. Yeah,
for sure.
Right.
We'll be working for them in 2 generations.
Short. but that's the true, that's the real cutting edge stuff. Most of the time when you're talking about AI, and I think just for the purpose of the conversation, we'll just say AI instead of machine learning and AI, and they're 2 different things, but a lot of overlap. When you start looking at AI, really what you're doing, you're talking about extremely sophisticated filters, right? So you're saying, I want this, not that. And if you give me this, then I want you to further refine it down and down until I get a signal, right? So just like your the old school radio dials, what they do is they help you find, they're filtering out everything to help you find the exact signal that you're looking for, and you refine that manually until it comes in clear. Well, you're telling the computers to do the same thing. That means that you need a training data set, which is essentially the answers to the test. So you need that at varying levels depending on the type of algorithm you're using and how you built it. But you want to take the answers to the test, feed them into the computer, and then see if the computer, when it takes the test, spits out the same answers. And if it doesn't, well, then you refine it a little bit more, and then you run it again. At the end of that, process, you have a highly refined machine learning model that operates at 999 efficacy. So, 99.9% accuracy. Well, we're currently at about 86%. And the reason for that is we started looking for a human trafficking data set, human trafficking training set for a machine learning algorithm. We contacted MIT, Harvard, Stanford, all the, Carnegie Mellon, trying to say, hey, who's got one that we can lease? Because that's a business. And no one had ever built one. And
Really?
As far as we could find, nobody in the history of the world has ever built a human trafficking specific machine learning training data set. So now you know what Kara and a lot of the analysts are doing in their times when they're not running law enforcement operations or assisting with law enforcement operations. They're building this training data set. And it's a very difficult process to get the initial part of it. Once you want to go, once you get it to about 80, you get about 80% of the data you need, then you can start creating synthetic data, which is something that we are doing. Once we get it to the level of efficacy that we need, then the computer can take over and say, okay, I got a general idea what you're looking for here. Let me create a bunch of synthetic data sets that mathematically look the same to a computer. They don't look the same to you and I, but mathematically they look the same to a computer to then hyper refine that training data set. And that removes things like bias. That removes the bias of the people who actually were doing the tagging of the data. But it's a very manual process because you have to have human beings tag data inside of a data set. And each one of those data sets has, call it anywhere from 5 to 10 different data points. They're tagging each one of those different data points on like what it is. This is a phone, that's a hat, this is a microphone, and then they go on to the next one. And we figure we're going to have to do about 10,000 data sets before we can start creating our own synthetic data. And once we can create synthetic data, then that's when we can really start moving the needle on this issue.
That's the bridge to the 999.
Yeah. So then what we're doing is essentially creating an automated platform that detects human trafficking signal and brings it to the attention of whoever it's supposed to bring it to the attention of. So let me give you a very good example. We could not arrest our way out of the human trafficking issue. Couldn't do it.
I was actually going to ask you about that at some point. Is how are these human traffickers being treated in the court system from the prosecutorial standpoint?
Depends on the data in the evidence packet. So if they're working with DeliverFund, we've got a 100% conviction rate on the cases we've been involved in that have gone to court.
What kind of
most of them go to a plea deal,
though?
Usually around 15 years. Sometimes a plea deal will get it down to like 13 years. The biggest sentence we've had is 3 life sentences.
Okay. I like what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I was worried that it would be,
3 years, 2 years.
Anything at all.
It also depends.
Thrown out.
Yeah, it depends on the jurisdiction. So traditionally what has happened is prosecutors, they have to have a victim testify. That's the evidence. So they have to have a victim testify, and you're going to take a girl who's, got issues, who then became trafficked.
Yeah.
That the issues are what made her vulnerable. She was trafficked, and then she is going to get put on a stand in front of a Harvard-trained defense attorney and interrogated for 7 hours. We would have a hard time doing that. So prosecutors are not incentivized to lose cases and take risks, so they just weren't willing to do that. And increasingly, the electronic data is not only being used in the courts, but it's being used in lieu of the victim. So the victim is still available to testify, but that's the cherry on top of the cake that's already been baked.
Yeah.
If it doesn't get put there, it's still a cake that's been baked. And that's made prosecutors a lot less risk adverse on these cases, so they're more willing to go after them. Great example is the CSAM issue, right? The child sexual exploitation issue, child porn. If you are in possession of child porn, that is binary. You either are or are not. And if you are in possession of child porn and you're not a law enforcement officer who's investigating a case with associated child porn, or you're not an analyst with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, you have committed a felony. So prosecutors love those cases because it's just like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, We found child pornography on his phone. Prosecution rests. It's very, very simple.
You know what's insane about those cases, at least the ones that I've seen? It's never there was a picture of child porn.
Terabytes.
There was 10,000 images of, it's like.
Yeah, terabytes.
First off, where did you get that shit from? And secondly, who took those pictures? Because I want to kill all of those people.
Right. And so traditionally what is happening is prosecutors and law enforcement will find the guy with the material, and they will wrap him up, look at what the great job we did. What they won't do, and there's probably constitutional issues for this, around this.
Don't roll your eyes at the Constitution, Nick.
Hey.
Stupid Constitution.
Constitutional
Get out of my
arguments.
way.
What they won't do is they won't put bots in to then go trace and see where it leads them to. And then see
bots
where,
in.
Yeah,
like,
so
could work upstream.
Yeah. And
or
start
downstream, whatever.
It's the same thing we used to do in terrorism, right? Allegedly. Right? The super nerds would inject code into websites or different things that were visited by bad guys, and they would go out and that code would essentially replicate itself and just continue to go and go and go until it reached the end of the rainbow.
Well, it was the same as human. You started like this far-reaching branch that had almost no importance, and you try to work your way to the base of the tree or the trunk of the tree, and then on your way down, and you get the biggest chainsaw you can find, and you knock that fucker over.
That's right. Right. Or you JDAM it. One of the two.
Yeah.
So the human trafficking fight has traditionally been victim-centric, and we're changing that so the victim isn't really even part of the case anymore. It's all based on the electronic evidence. And then that allows the prosecutors and law enforcement officers to charge a litany of crimes, of which human trafficking might be one of them. I mean, one of the biggest, most violent human traffickers that our intel put away didn't get charged with human trafficking, but he's serving 30 years for money laundering.
We talked about this, I think, the first time that you were on. You described it as a hallway of doors.
Yeah, a hallway of charges. We're just walking you down.
Would you like this one today? Oh, that one's not good for you. How about this one over here? Oh, it makes the first option look a lot better, doesn't it?
Yeah. Or they don't want to go into prison as somebody who is associated with a child crime, especially a child sexual crime.
I've heard they don't get treated.
Yeah. So
spectacularly
they'll
well.
take the money laundering charge, which is going to be very different than the child exploitation charge for the 16-year-old girl that they were trafficking. I'm not going to change that system. I wish that was not the system. I'm not going to change it though, but I can use it to my advantage by creating the electronic packages in such a way so that they speak to that hallway of charges.
Yeah.
So what we have been doing with the Karas and the Shane Ericksons of the world, we are now automating so that the computers will do that. So we currently work with over 600 law enforcement agencies across the United States simultaneously.
What was it a year ago or 2 years? The first time you were ever on here?
I was probably
2-3 years ago. What were you at?
Like 75, 80.
So growing exponentially.
Yes, growing beyond our ability to deal with the scale in the traditional manual methods, which is why I had to spend the last 5 years getting real smart on computer science and machine learning and understanding how do you build these things in such a way so that we can work with all 18,000 jurisdictions in the United States simultaneously while we sleep.
Fortunately, you didn't have a TBI or cognitive stuff to deal with as you were learning those things.
So what's really interesting, no, get this. It's helpful if you have a traumatic brain injury.
Because you're learning new stuff?
So it's helpful from a brain wiring perspective that you're learning new stuff, yes. But it's also helpful that you have a traumatic brain injury because it can make you hyper-focused.
You're a glass half full kind of man. I appreciate it.
Actually makes it easier for you to learn some of that kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
Now, it might mean that you just nuke everything else because you're so focused on solving that problem.
Yeah.
And therefore you are creating more problems at a much higher scale to deal with.
Deal with those at a later time.
Yeah, exactly. Because right now I got to learn how to deal with this. And so we are building technology. We're building tech that protects, right? We are building technology that's going to automate away the bad guy here. And when I say tech that protects, it's not just that we're protecting society from human traffickers. It's bigger than that. we're protecting, the reason that technical solutions are so important is because think of it this way. That AI is protecting a human trafficking victim from having to go on the stand and be re-exploited, which would be hard for the best of people to do, much less somebody who's experienced that level of trauma and have that trauma thrown in their face as if it was their fault.
Probably staring at the eyes of the person who inflicted
Absolutely.
it as well.
They're in that chair right over there, right, with the defense. Then you have the law enforcement officer. So law enforcement officers are overworked and underpaid. And now you're going to sit there and make them scroll through some pretty disgusting imagery at a significant scale. What's that do to their brain? Well, we know that research is very, very well developed, and it's essentially fact at this point. So we know that has that the law enforcement officers and really hats off to these law enforcement officers because they are informed. They are told about vicarious trauma. They are told about the things that will happen to them should they choose to engage in the protection of these children, and they do it anyway.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Absolute heroes. So let's protect them from having to look at this imagery at scale. Let's protect society so that traffickers can't really do their business, right? Let's just we're attacking all the points of transaction within the market. So we're making it so that traffickers can't exist in polite society. And a great example of that is we're on Airbnb's Trust and Safety Council. So Airbnb knows that traffickers will use Airbnbs
like a mobile shop, if you will.
Yeah, instead of hotels.
Analogy, but
yeah, it's a mobile brothel basically.
Yeah.
Well, they also know that if you are one of their customers or you're one of their hosts, if you're a host, you do not want your house being used as a brothel. And if you are a customer, you don't want to rent a house that was just used as a brothel. So Airbnb also has a business case, as well as it being the right thing to do to keep traffickers out of their system. So we're working with Airbnb on some technical solutions that, just for NDA reasons and sources and methods reasons we're not going to get into, but these technical solutions will make it so that if you are a trafficker, you can't rent an Airbnb. You can't rent and you can't host, which means they also can't launder their money through the Airbnb platform. Great. On to the next one.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out how to make it so they can't buy groceries. I don't know how we're going to do that one yet, but we'll figure it out. So it all starts with the data. So over the last 7 years, we've created the largest, cleanest human trafficking database on the planet. We've also created one of the largest what we call red light databases on the planet. The human trafficking watch list, that never existed. 18 months ago, we realized that, so we started aggregating that data. We launched it 2 months ago. So it's all of the known human traffickers. So I'm talking people who were charged with human trafficking or human trafficking related crime, because in some jurisdictions it's not called human trafficking, and the various child crimes that are associated with human trafficking, all aggregated into one searchable list. So now we're just like we keep terrorists out of the banking system. We keep terrorists from getting plane tickets, right?
Yeah.
We essentially have a blacklist of people who are not allowed to operate within polite society. We've created that same thing on the trafficking side. And then on the illicit massage parlor side. So just because you have a massage parlor, that's maybe run by an American of Asian descent or an immigrant, does not mean it's an illicit massage parlor. But there are a lot of illicit massage parlors in this country, and they self-identify as illicit if you know where to get the data. Yeah. So we are all over those websites. They try to keep us out. We have some very, very cool technologies that mean that they just can't avoid us. They can't keep us out. We sit there and we just hoover in all their data. So we have this massive human traffic or illicit massage parlor database, and not all massage parlors are illicit, but all illicit massage parlors are trafficking depots. Every single one of them.
That makes sense.
So when you start looking at this going, oh, we're taking the geospatial data on the essentially human trafficking depots on the physical planet. We're taking the cyber data from all of the essentially human trafficking depots within the internet, within cyberspace, combining that with all of the known human traffickers, right? So 99.9% signal, and then combining that with we're also combining that with labor trafficking data and tissue trafficking data. You start to see a signal pretty quick. And as those algorithms get better and better, and it's not that the algorithm gets better, it's that the training data gets better, therefore the algorithm gets better. As it gets better and better, it starts to find that signal faster and faster and with greater levels of fidelity, which means that prosecutors and law enforcement officers trust it more. And then we have the other side, which is commercial industry helping. Like we work with a top 5 publicly traded bank. So they found 20 when they started using our data, they found 20 human trafficking networks in their bank in the first year.
Probably just based off behavior.
No, it's based off of I'll tell you, it's based off of personal metadata from that trafficker. So it's nothing to do with behavior. It has to do with essentially the way that they want to be communicated with.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's so simple. It's so simple. And if the traffickers knew how simple it was, they would just quit trafficking because there's really nothing they can do to avoid it.
I feel like at some point you're going to get to a place where there's not enough law enforcement to action all this.
So that is precisely the case. It's just like when we were trying to kill our way out of the war on terror, right?
How'd that work out for us?
Well, we found it was a Hydra, right? We killed one and 5 more popped up.
We were so good at our job that they realized they need to change the way that they were doing business.
Yeah. And then maybe add in allegedly a little bit of state sponsorship of IEDs. Thanks for that, Iran. And
don't leave Syria out.
Oh yeah, well, but was it really Syria, or are they just
that was probably just the entry level, the
just
entry port?
Are they just a dog on the Iranian leash?
It's hard to say. Who knows?
The Russian leash, really, at this point. So anyway, they had to change tactics. But what if their tactic? What if they changed their tactic to fine? We're just not going to kill people anymore. Sounds like a win to me.
I would be okay with that.
All right. So the traffickers do it for money. That's why they traffic people. They make a lot of money. It's a fairly low risk for them way to make money. Again, we have a drug enforcement agency. We have an ATF. We don't have a counter trafficking agency. So it's a fairly low risk way to do it. Very low barrier to entry in the market. You need a device, smartphone, get that for free. You need access to the internet, which you can get for free. And you need the ability to defraud, force, or manipulate a vulnerable person into a series of circumstances where they will do whatever you want. Pretty low barrier to entry. So you have to be a disgusting person with an internet connection. That's basically it. So they do it for money. They make a lot of it right now because it's low risk. Well, what if we can start turning up that risk? So think of it this way. The arrest of a human trafficker is actually a failure. So your teams back in the day shooting a terrorist in the face is a failure of every single effort that every single government agency and USAID and NSA operation and everything beforehand did to try to prevent the creation of that terrorist.
Okay,
right?
I see what you're laying up, yeah.
So we saw all that money, billions and billions of dollars being spent on kids' soccer fields so that we wouldn't create that terrorist down the road. And yet, if somebody shows up in a target package, that means that every single one of those efforts failed.
Yeah, all the other options have been exhausted.
Yeah. I look at trafficking as exactly the same way. If a law enforcement officer is arresting a human trafficker, that is a failure of everything beforehand, which is a failure of the education system, and I'm speaking societally here, not formal education system, to properly educate the victim. In this case, usually a young girl,
I'd put a step before that.
Or even younger boy.
Failure in the parents as well.
Yeah. Well, yes. So we could get into the deep societal issues, because then it's like, well, why was the trafficker created in the first place?
Yeah.
Also a societal issue, right? But if we get to the things that we actually can like control for, so there's the helping that girl know that that guy who hit her up on TikTok is not going to be the answer to all of her problems. And then the, hey, no, don't send that nude photo to that guy. Oh, you did send the nude photo? Okay, tell an authority figure quickly, because the things that will happen to you are far worse than if he actually does post it on your school's website. To on and on and on and on, right? Then we make it so that the trafficker can't communicate with her. If he experiences, right, if that communication has a certain pattern, then Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, just shuts down the communication, just doesn't allow it to happen anymore, right? Okay, problem solved. All right, well, they managed to get through that. The trafficker knows that he's got to talk to, just to make the math easy, 10 young girls to get 5 to agree to communicate, to get 3 to agree to meet, to get 1 to actually show up, and that girl's life is ruined and changed forever.
Yeah.
So how about we make it so that he can't ever talk to the 10? Or instead of talking to 10, he can only talk to 2. Right, so we just start significantly reducing the numbers and complicating the system, right? Attacking the points of transaction within the marketplace. So if we attack the communication, well, that didn't work. Now we attack the finances. Got his money seized. He can't buy her the plane ticket. He can't pay his rent, and he gets evicted, and now he's homeless or living out of his car, or whatever the case may be, right? So we attack his financial system. Okay, so if he manages to slip through that, now we attack his ability to use any of that money. Can't get an Airbnb, can't get an Uber, can't get a Lyft, can't get a plane ticket, right? And then if he manages to slip through that, then we attack the advertisers. So we're working on some really cool technology. If we do this again next year, hopefully we'll be able to publicly release it. But it's essentially going to waste the trafficker and the customer's time. Because the one thing that Bill Gates and I have that is exactly the same, that Elon Musk and you have that is exactly the same, is there's 60 seconds in a minute.
True story.
Nobody ever spent any amount of money that could get a single second back of their life.
Listen, just because you watched the fucking Avengers doesn't mean you can steal Tony Stark's name, okay?
Hey, so that's what we do. we ruin their ability to make money at a level that matters to them. Then they'll go out and they'll go do other things.
I love all of that, but I wish that we as a society would put equal emphasis on not letting our children grow up and to be pieces of shit. Being engaged, being involved, not outsourcing that stuff. I mean, hurt people hurt other people, man. And again, I'm not saying any of this is, everything that you laid out is fantastic.
It's how you fight the problem, but it's not how you fight the societal issue over here.
Yeah, which is leading into the problem, because pieces of shit are going to do piece of shit things.
But then let's also talk about the customers, right? So we have customers that are driving this entire market, right? These guys wouldn't be doing this if there wasn't
no money to be made.
It. Yeah. So we now the customers, that's a much larger issue. There's societal issues there too that create customers. And it's the I think it largely boils down to, and this is really going to get your comments flying.
Tell me more.
It largely boils down to the commoditization of women. So women and girls. So let me explain this. We talk about the objectification of women, but most women I know will tell you that in some circumstances, women want to be objectified. It's why they do the things they do sometimes, or why they dress the way that they do sometimes, right? And,
I think that's fair.
Just a statement of fact, right? Now that is going to get me crucified in your comments. However, what about the commoditization issue? That's, I think, what we're missing, because no woman or girl wants to become a commodity. I have politicians, predominantly on the left, not a political issue, that's just where they tend to be, who will tell me that, sex work is work just like any other. Really? Are you then, Mr. Politician, putting that in front of your daughter as a potential form of employment? Because if it's just work just like any other,
Yeah,
been,
is they gonna pop up a booth here at the high school job fair?
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
not even sure they still do that? But
are you? That means that you're okay with your wife switching careers.
Yeah,
And,
that conversation
right?
is going to be short-lived.
Yeah,
and just annotated by fingers on a chalkboard.
yeah. So why do we as a society allow that thought process, right? The commoditization of women and girls. And I tell you, the epiphany I had here was, if you go to the DeliverFund YouTube page, you'll see a YouTube video that we made about a boy named Noah. And Noah was trafficked. He was groomed through a video game console. I think we talked about this last time. Kara was the one who found him.
Didn't he end up communicating through that console?
Yep.
And then left the house to meet somebody, probably in a fucking ice cream van. In my head, that's how it plays out. Down by the river.
Free ice cream on the side.
The
It's white.
Yeah.
Guy in a ski mask. No, actually, truck driver, 18-wheeler. Put him in the cab, and this boy was in the southwestern United States, and by the time Kara tracked him down, or tracked not the boy but the trafficker down, because the boy obviously has no signature at that point. Tracked the trafficker down, figured out who the trafficker was, figured out where he was. He was 4 states into the interior of the United States.
And this was a matter of days.
That was a matter of 4.5 hours.
Okay, that's not exactly days. That's much faster.
Yeah. So that's how quick this happens.
Yeah.
Now, we'd been doing cases before, lots of cases. We can tell you the Samantha case on how, Dallas, which is, a video on our YouTube channel, trafficked from 12 to 22 years old. And a lot of people be like, oh, wow, that's really sad. But you know what I experienced from both women and men on the Noah story? I didn't experience sadness. I experienced anger.
Yeah.
Why the difference? Why are we sad about one and we are angry about the other?
It's a good question.
And the only thing I can come up with, my thesis is that it's because we expect women and girls to be commoditized. And so it doesn't surprise us as much. But we find out that it happened to a young boy. Well, wait a minute. That's not right. How many, are there a lot of male Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders? I'm sure there are some, but I mean, this day and age, who knows?
Could be arguably the most bizarre question I've ever been asked.
But
I do not know. I don't think there's any.
I don't think there's any either.
Yeah.
But that's kind of my point. Again, societal issues have trained men to commoditize women upstream through all these ways that we, through everything from media to especially social media. And this is not let's demonize social media conversation. Social media is great. Social media actually, believe it or not, does bring some good to the world, but there's a lot of negatives that come with it.
I was going to say it throws a shadow, and the shadow is pretty goddamn big.
Very long, especially for teenage girls. But through all of these different societal issues that we're dealing with, we end up with a commoditization of women. So when I talk to men about the human trafficking issue, and I get asked to go talk to men's groups, or I talk to donors or whatever, and they say, and I start talking about human trafficking, and the very first thing they say is, well, isn't that the oldest profession in the world? I'm like, boy, did you draw a quick line between human trafficking and prostitution. You want to tell me about that? Wow, well, I didn't say anything about prostitution. And it's like, well, but that's okay. But human trafficking is where somebody's being forced to do something. Mm-hmm. But also, why do you think that that's okay? Why is it that you'll hire, there was a case here locally where somebody was actually hired a girl out of a high school. She was 18, so it was technically legal, but it was immoral and unethical, right? And hired her to, we'll say, jump out of a box. I think you might know some of the story I'm talking about. And that guy will tell you, he's a, we'll say he's an architect.
Okay. Just use his real name.
Deals with buildings.
Yeah, just use his real name.
Will tell you, and even said publicly that he treated that girl like gold, and he changed her life. Awesome. So you hired the local high school boys to mow your lawn, but you hired this young girl to perform other services. Why is that okay? It's not under any circumstances. That's the societal issue that we have to get to the bottom of, so that people don't think that it's okay to commoditize women, right? That oh, well, there's a price, right? Because that's what a commodity is. It's something that's sold on a market for a price. Well, that's okay to have girls and women that are sold on a market for a price. And where that gets really confrontational, and this is going to blow up your comments even more, is on the line between the pornography and human trafficking. That is a extremely well-defined line. That is a statement of fact at this point. Very well researched, peer-reviewed research. I'm sure Kara will be doing all kinds of Instagram posts, at Kara the Huntress, talking about this and putting the studies out there. But the line between prostitution and human trafficking, the line from pornography to human trafficking, I mean, they're linear. And
what's the line? Like, what's the separation?
So OnlyFans is a great example. I think a lot of people are familiar with what OnlyFans has become. It's essentially an amateur pornography website.
Very happy to say I've never been on there.
So you have essentially housewives and college girls who are making millions of dollars being taking photos and videos essentially of themselves
don't they
and posting them online.
Take requests and like set a price point? And
that I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know exactly how it works. But what I do know is that there are traffickers then that will come in and essentially offer to manage these girls and then just start taking all their money. And the girls will fall for it because they've got millions of dollars. They don't have any business experience. They don't necessarily know what they do. They have lots of money and therefore lots of problems, and somebody comes in and says, oh, hey, let me be your business manager. Let me help you out. And they're like, okay, yeah, that'd be great. Making money hand over fist. And the next thing you know, he's making money hand over fist and she's addicted to heroin. So that happens at a pretty large scale. There's another phenomenon.
And that's the line you're talking about?
Yeah.
Somebody doing it because they...
Yeah, so
for whatever
so
choice they want to make versus somebody else controlling the levers behind the scenes.
Well, there's that line, but then on the customer side, you have the customer who is a fan of whatever girl on OnlyFans, and he's paying her, but now she's under the control of a trafficker, so that customer is actually paying the trafficker. Mm-hmm. He is paying for services, so to speak, from a slave. Think about that. And does he know what transpired between the last visit where she was working for herself and the current visit where she's being forced to work for somebody else? A customer has no idea. No idea.
My head first goes to, would the customer even care?
That's actually a very, very good question.
You know, I would like to think that people have a moral compass. For one,
I would like to think that most would.
I would like to think that most would. I feel like, and I say this without judgment for people who would choose to use that site, I feel like people who are seeking that out through that medium would not.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know.
I mean, just think of it from the prostitution perspective. If you're saying, 80% trafficking versus 20% of people who are consensually engaging in that activity, if the John, as I believe they're called, this is currently the depth of my knowledge when it comes to prostitution.
Yeah.
Would it change anything if they knew?
That's a good question. So I think so.
I hope so.
And most of the data I've seen, most of the studies I've seen says that it does. Right. And these are studies where they will contact customers will contact in, and then they will give indicators of trafficking, and then the customer will be like, "Whoa, this is weird," and will.
But
report.
Are they saying that because they don't want to get in trouble from law enforcement, or is it a moral issue?
So so what we've seen in so there are review sites for prostitutes.
Shut.
Yeah.
The fuck up.
Yeah. No, dude. Review sites for prostitutes, review sites for illicit massage parlors. So when we say, like as an example, when we say that we know that building over there is an illicit massage parlor, we're not saying that because, well, you see the way the sign is hung in the window. No, it's none of that. We're saying we have 20,000 reviews over the last 5 years from people reviewing explicitly in detail the services that they received inside that building. Statement of fact.
That's some Jason Bourne shit, right?
Yeah, right.
Very James Bond.
Yeah. So again, it's all about, do you know where to get this data, and can you collect it in aggregate, and then can you find signal within it?
I don't care what your sign looks like at the front.
Yeah.
If you have 20,000 reviews.
Oh, some of them will have over 100,000 reviews.
How many fucking people are going into a massage parlor every day?
So 9% of the U.S. male population admits to engaging in commercial sex routinely. Routinely. As in, it is part of their lifestyle.
Why would you do that?
I do not know. But those are the problems that I'm not trying to solve, is figuring out why people would do things like this.
Yeah, trust me, the path you guys are taking.
There are solutions for that, and they're very cheap, and they usually involve this finger right here. God. You know?
Well, just the human behavior scares the shit out of me sometimes. Yeah. Like, okay, so 9% of, you say the U.S. population?
9% of U.S. males.
Okay, so what do we got? 360 million, we'll call it 100, even though I think it's slightly different. So 180, let's say even half of those are under 18, so we'll go 80 million adult males, 9 times 8. That's 7.2 million people.
It's a lot. Now, they don't all visit illicit massage parlors. Some of them do that.
Ecosystem.
Some of them are, prostitutes. Some of them have a weird fetish for some other things.
That is a lot of people.
A lot of people. Now you see the market opportunity for the traffickers and why we have such a scale issue to deal with. So the solution is not, let's go rescue human trafficking victims. That actually makes the problem worse, right? You create shelf space on the shelf for new victims. Those new victims, so you just made more victims. Let's go arrest every human trafficker. Good luck, right? Law enforcement doesn't have the time, money, or manpower to be able to do that. Let's go keep them off of the internet. Well, that's not really realistic either. But let's keep them off the internet. And if that doesn't work, go to the next one. If that doesn't work, go to the next one. So instead of a 10% chance of success, you have a 90% chance of success, because you've whittled it down, and you've just complicated the market economics, or the unit economics really, for the trafficker so much that it's just not worth their time. And I'm just going to go deal drugs, or I'm going to go sell guns, or I'm going to go pull, copyrighted buildings, or do whatever bad people do. So that's when you look at it at the scale of the problem. That's why you have such a large market. So that's where you have traffickers will force their girls to dance in strip clubs. They will force their girls to, obviously provide what appears to be prostitution services, amateur pornography online, professional pornography online. They will sign a girl up to be a porn star. But they will just tell everybody that they are her business manager, right? And so the pornography company, you're a pornographer, you're probably not a great upstanding person anyway. You're like, okay, sounds good, and here you go, right? And so they're the ones getting paid for the work of the trafficking victim. And then you look at what we were dealing with in Ukraine last year, extremely horrific stuff of actually growing babies for the purposes, in these large hotel brothels, basically. But they would just one of the floors was just impregnated women, and they would grow babies in these women, either for the purposes of adopting the baby, usually to couples in Asia or Western Europe.
Talking like through adoption service type stuff?
Yep. Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. So it appears to be all legal through the adoption side. Or they were selling the babies for their organs to people who had children with heart conditions or things like that.
We are the worst as a species.
Yes, we are.
God.
So all of those transactions, though, and this is actually really the bright spot, because the farther I started the more I started learning about this, the more it was just like, man, what is freaking Nic McKinley going to do? You know, I mean, you give me $1 billion and I'm just going to go start hiring a bunch of analysts and I'm going to create my own version of the NSA. Like, that's not going to work. And simultaneously, I was learning more and more about computer science and machine learning and how that world was working. And that's where kind of the aha moment hit to say, wait a minute, all of the signals that we need in order to counter human trafficking exist. Traffickers are telling us, they're showing us their product, which means we can get all kinds of biometric signatures, as well as other signatures, the curtains, the books, the brand of the microphone stand, right? All that stuff that we're getting out of the photos. Plus, there's the individual for the biometric signatures. Plus, there's the biometric signature of the trafficker who took the photo. Mm-hmm. So, what's the camera angle, right? I mean, you probably take photos most of the time holding your phone at relatively the same way.
I took a few today. I'm not ashamed to admit it, Nick.
And it's going to be different than the way that I do it. So
it'll be slightly less good.
It probably will be.
I'm an amateur photographer.
Except
Plus, it looks like you have the older model. I mean, that's just going to be trash.
But the AI in my phone has been upgraded, so it's going to take a better photo because my phone just takes the photo for me. Right?
That's fine. You taught yourself about it, and I just buy mine from the apple.com.
There you go. So the thing here, though, is that less people are going to look at my photos.
Maybe.
It's going to be like, who is this dude? So we, by understanding all of this, and it's just like, it'll just throw you into like the depths of despair. Like, what are you going to do? It's just the disgustingness of the world. But then understanding that all of the signals are there. So there's the things that we mentioned before, but there's also the trafficker has to provide a means of communication.
Yeah.
Because you got to be able to do some commerce. And then you've got to exchange something of value somehow. It could be drugs, could be cryptocurrencies, it could be cash, it could be something, but you have to exchange value or it's not worth the trafficker to do that. And then the thing about human trafficking is it is always a in-person event. Now, it might be in-person, real-time on separate sides of the world through a Zoom link or a Google Meet or something, or FaceTime or something like that. But it's always in person. So two people are meeting at a point on the globe or at a point in cyberspace, right? So all of those things have to be true in order for the human trafficking market to actually work. And therein lies the opportunity, because every one of those, what we call a point of transaction, is an opportunity to attack that market. And if we understand what to attack at each one of those points of transaction, then we can automate those attacks and make it so that that information, if it makes it all the way to the end, gets fed to law enforcement. Then make it all the way to the financial system, gets fed to the bank, gets fed to FinCEN, right? Our financial crimes networks. If it makes it into Airbnb, they say, sorry, we don't do business with your kind, right? Makes it into Uber, sorry, we don't do business with your kind. And the holy grail is to prevent it all the way at the far end, which is, get as far left of bang as you can get. And that is at the point of connection between the trafficking victim and the trafficker. Now, there's this thing you may have heard of before. It's called reverse planning. So we just did the same thing within the human trafficking market. So if I said a failure of the system is a law enforcement officer arresting a trafficker, that's where we started. So we started there. Then we went into points of transaction, to working with the financial system. Now we're starting to work with the hospitality system, because the trafficker has to get the place before they get the financial transaction. Yeah. Now we're starting to slowly get that back. And what I want to have is enough data to aggregate the models, to aggregate it so that the models are so finely tuned that the social media companies will be able to say, wait a minute, there's this 12-year-old girl in Ohio, and there's this 40-year-old man in Miami who have no other ties, because they know all that stuff. So they have no other ties. And
but yet they're chatting.
They're chatting, and now she is attempting to send him a photo. Sever communications. And now the system just doesn't let them communicate anymore. And then shares that information on this guy in Miami to all the other social media companies. It says, hey, we detected, we had our human trafficking signal detector detected human trafficking at a, 97.83% probability. Our threshold for cutoff is 95. Here's this guy's information. And they share it with all of their competitors, and all their competitors say, thank you, we will add that guy to the blacklist. And now we have just made it so that guy cannot operate within social media. So he doesn't have access to victims.
How did that interaction occur prior to the internet? Like early 90s.
Oh, so...
I mean, I feel like the internet is an amazing thing, right? Like it's like unlimited access to information.
Mm-hmm.
You can go on YouTube and probably give yourself a doctorate in any particular, not that you're going to get a doctor, but doctorate level information if you wanted to.
Sure.
People can connect with families across the country, right, or across the globe. And I mean, let's be honest, online banking is way better than having to go wait in line at Bank of America.
Thank you, USAA. I have not walked into a bank in, 20 years.
You know what's messed up?
25 years.
Bank of America. You know what state they don't have a branch in?
Montana.
That's correct. It should be Bank of America except for Montana.
Dude, I am not paid to endorse USAA, but you are a veteran, sir.
I did my insurance through USAA, not banking.
USAA banking is amazing.
All right.
Amazing.
I will make sure you get your royalty check for that.
It is better. I would say USAA is a benefit that is on par with like the GI Bill. Okay. It's a freaking amazing. I love them. And no, I'm not paid to say
I opened my first account with Navy Federal Credit Union when I was a very young man, and I've stayed with them because I am loyal.
Because you don't quit. See?
Never. I'm never quitting on Navy Federal. But how did that
happen
before
the internet?
I just feel like not only the internet is a great tool, but like with every tool, right? There's the other side of the blade.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that you are describing, it's the connectivity. It's the ability to reach people that you would never be able to before. So how the fuck did they do this previous to the internet?
The Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts, the soccer coaches. Think of everything, every news story that you ever heard of where somebody was exploiting children. And a lot of it, too, was this is going to blow up your comments, too, so you're welcome for this.
Just remember who's saying it.
Pimp culture.
Pimp culture.
Yeah, so there's no such thing as a pimp. Pimps are human traffickers, right? Where, I mean, it's pretty despicable. There's culture that actually goes back to what's called the Memphis model of pimping, which goes all the way back to the 60s. The farthest we can trace it is that's kind of where it started. And these, they called themselves pimps, but they were traffickers who would control women and force them to, what appeared to be prostitution, but it's not. It's not prostitution because it's not chosen. It's cool to be a pimp culture, which was really exonerated a lot in the inner cities. It led directly to both men thinking it's okay to be a trafficker and women thinking it's okay to get trafficked because they didn't know exactly what that meant. So that's how it happened. And then on the hands-on offender side of the child issues, and let's keep in mind a 16-year-old girl is a child.
Yeah, the argument could be made that an 18-year-old girl is a child. Dude, I mean, I get it in the eyes of the law. You're an adult, but
45, and my wife will tell you I'm a child because I am.
Yeah.
So the way that it happened was those hands-on offenders for child crimes would go to the places where the children were. So you had a 40-year-old man with no kids who's not married who's a soccer coach. Yeah. Maybe just has a love of soccer. Maybe he's a little weird. You look at all the abuses that have come out and all the scandals that have come out against the Catholic Church and all the priest abuses, right? So in the past, the bad guy, so to speak, had to go to places where that bad guy could have the best chance of success, which meant they needed the highest number of potential victims.
But it required that geographic proximity to
Right.
begin with.
Yeah. So it wasn't happening at the same scale.
Yeah.
National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, phenomenal organization. We work closely with them. They found that they had an 846% increase in suspected child exploitation crimes in a 5-year period. And that was from, I believe it was 2010 to 2015. So why?
Jesus.
Well, when you look at smartphone adoption rates and Facebook
Probably
adoption rates,
tracked in a parallel growth.
Yeah, almost a linear 1-to-1 correlation.
Why is it with child porn? And maybe this does happen and it doesn't go into the news. Why isn't it individual found with 5 pictures? Why is it always 1,000 pictures, 10,000? Like, when is enough? Like, what?
I don't
fuck?
know. So as I understand it, and again, that's not really our area of expertise, but there is some overlap between trafficking and the people who deal with that. I've had law enforcement officers and psychologists explain this as like the pictures are currency. And so in that world.
Oh, to them. So the more you have, the richer you are.
Yeah, and they like trade them between each other. Like, oh, I've got a bunch of this. Do you have a bunch of that? Let's trade, right? And so a lot of times there might be a lot of materials that they don't even necessarily like. They have, my understanding is that all of these guys have like their thing that they like, right? However disgusting that might be, that's their thing. But they might have a lot of other stuff that they don't even necessarily like, but that's material they can trade to get more of what they do like. So it's currency.
I have a solution to this problem. All right.
Let's hear it.
It's going to be off the cuff. All right. I haven't completely thought it out beyond what just came to me.
That's when you do your best work, though.
So it might need to be refined. Somebody gets arrested. 10, however many thousand images they have. They get sentenced. I get to come. And
you personally?
Personally.
Okay, so we're going to deal with a scale issue here on execution, but let's keep going with it.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because I have ideas to maybe make people think twice about this.
I got it.
It's going to get live streamed.
Okay.
You can join if you want to. And all I get is a potato peeler. And the number of images that you have is exactly how many slices I am going to slowly take out of your fucking flesh until you die. So if you have 10,000 images, I'm going to pack a lunch and maybe a dinner. And I'll take a break whenever I want to. But on the 10,000th slice, you're done. But not up until that point. And that shit gets live streamed. And then I'm going to go to the next cell, to the dude who has 3,000 images. And we're going to continue until people realize maybe it's not worth it. Now, I'm not sure this is going to work, but that's what I'm thinking about right now.
I think there's probably, again, weren't you getting on me for rolling my eyes about that pesky Constitution?
Yes.
I think you just violated a couple of the tenets of the Constitution.
Like I said, it was off the cuff.
So suddenly black sites are a good idea, aren't they?
No. This isn't a black site. I'm live streaming this.
But it doesn't mean that somebody has to know where you're live streaming it from. That's what VPNs are for.
I'll be happy to go any prison as long as they can provide a moderate level and modicum of security and, time and space.
Yeah, you need a lot of time.
I just feel like I would feel so much better about humanity if they let me do that to somebody.
I think a lot of people would also feel better about humanity if they would let you do that.
I don't know what it says about me that I would want to be the person that would do that, but
you know what? It's ends and means, man. Ends and means. So, but some of these sickos, they have terabytes of this stuff, just terabytes of it.
But in all the articles you read, it's not found small folder on laptop with 5 images. It's found 8 computer towers full, hard drives. It's unbelievable.
And then there are professional level production studios. So those are ultimately, so like when we get to the end of that rainbow of, building machine learning models that will essentially automate the caras of the world, right? You still need a human in the loop. It's to be a semi-supervised system where you still have a human being like, yep, computer got the answer to the test right. On to the next one, right? So you'll be able to do what currently takes 6 hours, you'll be able to knock out in about, anywhere from 60 seconds to 6 minutes. So now you can start to do case volume and then all of that data, right? So it just starts to become this snowball that just builds on itself. The more data you get, the better the algorithms get, which allow you to get more data, which allow you to get better algorithms, right? And it just starts working. And then from there, the next step is you start going out to the production studios. So there are, especially on the child pornography and even on the pornography side, where they're using trafficking victims, that is predominantly happening overseas by Americans and by Westerners, but predominantly happening overseas because they're paying off the governments. And then you just start going and making those production studios' lives an absolute living nightmare.
Like with a JDAM.
Well, I was actually thinking more of your potato peeler idea, right? I mean,
yes.
Right. So that's overseas.
It can be outsourced.
Different place, right?
I'm open to taking my work overseas.
Yeah. You know,
and training others.
It's essentially a FID, but for right for this only instead of a foreign internal defense, it's a foreign societal defense, right? Because and I think anybody listening to this, and I guarantee you there's some people listening to this who are getting very uncomfortable with this conversation.
They
because
should be.
They are that pornography customer. They are that prostitution, that commercial sex customer. And there's just no justification for it. I've heard all the justifications. There's no justification for it. Nobody wants to look in the mirror and realize, like, I am part of that extremely evil economy. So if you're now realizing that, hey, you didn't know, now you do, don't engage in it anymore. It's that simple, right?
Easier said than done for a lot of people. I think.
And I'm sure it is. Get the help you need, but that is not an excuse to continue to put your head in the sand and pretend like you didn't know what was actually happening. And is it all of them? No, absolutely not. But we've seen in these review sites where you will have customers of what they think is a prostitute literally talking about the girl's pimp, right? And how they have become friends with the girl's pimp. Like, that is unjustifiable. So that's also another use for your potato peeler.
I mean, let's not get crazy with it. It can't be used far and wide, right? It's not penicillin. All right, this has to be targeted. Dude, out of all the information that you see, are you hopeful? Because obviously you are looking into a pool with the tools that you are using. Mm-hmm. That provides to you an optic that probably nobody else, except for your team, obviously, and the people that you provide access to the information can see. Are you hopeful? Or are you sitting here like, holy shit, I am trying to stop an avalanche with a garden shovel?
I'm extremely hopeful.
Okay, good. Because
Extremely
I am
hopeful.
Not, after listening to you fucking talk for almost 3 hours.
Hey, I am the buzzkill.
It's like, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to look at all, you fucking asshole. You're probably like.
So I'm extremely hopeful. Part of that is I'm getting my brain healthy.
Okay.
The second part of that is I don't really do the work and look at the stuff anymore. I occasionally have to see some things, but it's the people like Kara, Shane Erickson, Sal Hernandez. Those folks are the ones that are doing the real heavy lifting.
Yeah, they're in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely, day in and day out. And part of us building these technology suites, or really this technology stack, is to protect their brains as well over time. Because they're experiencing vicarious trauma and all the stuff, right? Very similar to, as I understand it, drone pilots are starting to have some cognitive effects from their work overseas. It's the same thing. Do they have traumatic brain injury? Nope. Do they have, any physical issues? Nope.
But input informs output.
Exactly. But did their eyes see a lot of pretty nasty stuff?
Yeah.
Yes. And then we all know there's a lot of drones that sat over targets for days and watched some pretty disgusting stuff happen while they were waiting for a green light on a target. So someone was ingesting that. So we want to protect our analysts as well, and that's why we make it so that the computers do the heavy lifting on these cases. So law enforcement just has to go look at it and say, yes, what the computer found is true. And then those are essentially pre-built evidence packages that can go into court. And
Given the scale, I think that automation is probably the only tool.
It's the only way.
Well, it's the only way that you're going to get ahead of it, because I don't know shit about AI. My favorite thing so far that I've seen about AI is that somebody used AI to write a poem about Steven Seagal fighting seagulls. And I'll send it to you because it's good. Because it was sent to me many times, and I was like, maybe AI is useful for something.
So you could use it right now. If you go to OpenAI and start using a new platform that just got released called ChatGPT, it's this.
I think this is where it was created from.
It's so awesome.
Yeah.
It's AI. It's awesome. We've been
but
having
at
all kinds of
scale,
fun with it.
and like I don't care if you had.
But what was the training set for ChatGPT?
I have no idea.
The internet.
Yeah.
Like that's the scale of the data set that they used to train that algorithm.
That's a lot of data.
Yeah, the internet pre-2001, or I'm sorry, pre-2021. That is a lot of information, and that is a lot of computational expense. And that's one of our, so you hear me being like, oh, like there's this plan, there's this roadmap. How can we do that? And why don't we do it faster? Well, we need to sell more of those T-shirts.
This T-shirt's awesome, by the way. Go ahead and describe it. I don't know if people can see it. It's basically just Rambo. It's totally fine.
But whoever owns copyrights to Rambo, my graphic designer made it from scratch, so you can't come after us.
I don't know if that's how that works, but
it is how it works.
Okay.
Actually, yeah, it's not the actual image.
Yeah,
it's a rendering of the image.
What you're doing isn't free, for sure.
Yeah, it's not free. So we're, I think, the only nonprofit that is not a university or a hospital that has their own supercomputer. We have petaflops of computing power, which is, AKA a lot, in Dallas. And we're getting ready to hopefully put one up here as well. That's where, when you say AI, what you're talking about is lots and lots and lots of linear algebra, right?
Yeah.
Lots of math. Math is expensive, right? Computational power is very expensive. Data storage is actually becoming increasingly cheap. It's the computation of that data, right? So there's something with these new iPhones. I think they said the photo app is doing something like 1 billion processes in order to make that picture come out so well. It's essentially putting because your photo app in your iPhone is an AI algorithm using these 3 different lenses, saying, hey, this is what it should look, and it's essentially putting a lot of photographers out of business because you don't need a photographer anymore. You can get a headshot with this thing that's just as good,
these cameras
if not better.
And then the night mode, which is probably doing some math of some kind.
Yeah.
So
yeah, right. The augmented reality that you can do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's all math. So the computation is extremely expensive, and
probably
so that's
cheaper than hiring 1,000 analysts, though. Which, quite frankly,
yes,
the computational power could probably do their jobs faster anyway. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it can do their
answer.
It can do their job faster,
more accurately.
It can do it more accurately, and it can do it at that speed and that accuracy until the hardware breaks. So all the time. So one of the things that we're getting ready to launch next year, your listeners will probably love this, is you'll be able to go on shop.deliverfund.org and you'll be able to buy a little black box. It's got a red light and a green light on it. And it's a DeliverFund logo on the top of it. You can buy that, you plug it into your home internet connection. And what that does is it allows our supercomputer to expand its geographical footprint. So you're essentially loaning the extra bandwidth in your home internet connection to allow us to collect data against the bad guys. It's currently in an alpha mode, alpha state right now. So we're building them, we're hacking them, we're patching those bugs, we're building it again, right, and going through that iteration. Probably in Q2 we will be releasing it to some of our friends with. They don't wear black hats, but they don't wear white hats either. They're very gray hats. We'll be releasing them to see, what bugs they can find in them and if they can hack them. And then once we get these things all armored up, then we'll be able to ship them out to the public. And so anybody who wants to loan their the electrons out of their wall socket and their extra bandwidth on the internet will be able to buy one of these things and help us aggregate even more data. So that's why I'm very hopeful, because I can see a very clear solution here. Now, is this going to end human trafficking? No. Is it going to reduce it by 80%? Well, the DOJ says that 86% of their human trafficking cases start online. So if I can reduce a trafficker's ability or near eliminate a trafficker's ability to use the internet, well, now we've gotten somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's why actually I'm very hopeful, because I think for the first time we've got the right the right people looking at the issue with the right set of experiences, with the right technological brains. I mean, my chief architect I just hired earlier this year was one of the lead architects from Sandia National Labs. So we're taking some of the best and brightest minds we can find and throwing them at this problem. That's why I'm very hopeful that we'll actually be able to get there. So it's just a matter of being able to keep the engine running long enough to be able to get these tools out so that they can just start being used at the scale human trafficking is happening.
Product idea. In addition to
potato peelers.
That's what I was going to go. Okay. In addition to the green red box, which is what I'm going to go ahead and call this thing, the DeliverFund green red box, for an additional $10, you get a DeliverFund potato peeler. Just in support of my idea that will probably go nowhere, but conceptually, you're behind it.
You heard it here first, folks. No, but like that. So that Rambo T-shirt, with our From Shooters to Computers line of T-shirts,
the original Rambo T-shirt. I think you probably just violated a copyright law by saying the Rambo T-shirt.
Hey, that's okay. I can say Rambo and T-shirt in a sentence. Cool. Come after me. Go ahead. You're going to get nothing. I mean, come on. I'm a guy who left government service, very little pay, to start a nonprofit, which are the only people who have figured out how to pay people less than the government. So again,
it's an impressive feat, actually.
I'm not worth a lawyer's time. That's part of my protection. But yeah, they can go to I think it's preorder.deliverfund.org, and they can sign up to be like, hey, like I want one of these things, right?
I'll put that link in the
we have our own coffee company.
What's it called?
Thrivers Coffee, right? So
where the hell did that come from?
Part of what we do is we take human trafficking survivors and turn them into thrivers.
All right, I like it.
So Thrivers Coffee, thriverscoffee.com. We make a profit on every single bag we sell. That profit goes into keeping electrons flowing through computers so that we can continue to do these things. And we have a number of different plans. So within the next 10 years, we will still be a nonprofit, but we will be a completely self-sustaining nonprofit, which I think all nonprofits should be thinking about. How am I going to look at donations as capital I can use to become self-sustaining, right? So you don't have to have your hat in hand for 10 years.
Yeah.
And that also protects the mission. So now you're not like, oh man, the economy went bad and donations are down. Like ours are down almost 2 million this year. So you don't have to worry about that. You can just say, hey, people are continuing to buy T-shirts, they're continuing to buy coffee, they're continuing to buy data. You've got an economic model that actually works to be able to fuel a, big, hairy, audacious goal like, ending human trafficking.
Yeah, that sustainability is key. Dude, we've been at it for 3 hours. What do you want to leave people with? Yeah.
Dang. Where did we start? Hazing.
Jason Bourne.
Jason Bourne. Yeah. Jason Bourne isn't real.
What was the name of the article they wrote about you? It was the real Jack Ryan?
Oh, that was, the Vice thing. Yeah, real Jack Ryan.
There you are.
Yeah.
You've been exposed.
Hey, what can I say? So there is no Jack Ryan. There is no Jason Bourne. We
covered the donkey with the fly buzzing around the head, so that covered all government.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
The red door of competence does not exist.
Yeah.
It's I think for our community can do so much good in the world. I mean, we really can. But one of the things, and I'll tell you what I want to address, the freaking backstabbing and the infighting in the soft community has got to stop. This zero-sum game of, oh, well, you were soft. Well, I was soft. Well, I was in a cooler unit than you. Oh, yeah, well, I was on a cooler target than you. Oh, yeah,
I have more kills than you do. And blah, 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 blah. It's never.
Yeah. I went to this school and, I went to this other school. It's just got to stop. It just, if you are a soft veteran, and I think there's other amalgamations of this, but I'll just focus on the soft community since that's what I know and that's what we're sitting here talking about. If you're a soft veteran, you are not integral to the war on terror. Like, just figure that out right now. If you weren't there, another guy would have been. You had the privilege of being there. Awesome. So did other people. And I spent my entire career in SOF and the CIA. Sounds really cool. But I know a guy who was an E2 Marine, just so happened to, and did one tour, just so happened to be in Fallujah at the height of the war. That guy did more in that one deployment than I did in the entirety of my career, probably continuing to date. And conventional dude, saw gunner, you know, held a street corner. Just happened to be a super sporty street corner, you know. And I sit here, you know, and he thinks I should have the stories he has, and I don't have 1% of the stories that guy has.
Yeah.
Right. So we as a community have to start rallying around each other and saying, hey, Andy, you've got a super successful podcast. Good job reinventing yourself. Instead of like, well, I can't believe, who does Andy think he is? You know, talking about this stuff.
He talks about what we used to do.
Yeah.
Sellout, selling the Trident.
You know, hey, Evan, you freaking crushed it creating a marketing company that happens to sell coffee. That's super brilliant. Good job, dude. You know, we need to start pointing at the people that are doing well. And like, who cares if that person was or was not a great operator? Does that have anything to do with what they're doing today? No. So let's, you know what? And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, well, but I was a really good operator, chances are you weren't as good as you think you were. I'm just gonna guess that.
Stop hitting us with the hard truths, Nick.
Yeah. So the backfighting or the backbiting and the freaking backstabbing and the infighting has just got to stop.
Backbiting?
I said backbiting.
Freudian slip.
I know,
Your
man.
PJs are into some kinky shit,
Hey,
obviously.
Man. You just, you know, there's always that line, and the one thing you can definitely guarantee is that Andy's going to just put a toe right over it.
Just so you know, on
Every
the
time.
last podcast, the one that was released today, I was talking about double dipping, and instead I was like, I said double dicking. I think Josh was like, what'd you just say? I'm like, oh yeah, I said double dicking. I'm like, I'm from the Navy. I'm like, just get over it.
Of course I did.
All you can do is own it.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's got to stop. And like, I want to see the soft community start lifting each other up. And if you have something negative to say, just don't say anything. Just don't say anything. Like the self-important arrogance within our community has to stop. Otherwise, we are going to destroy ourselves. I have seen since I started DeliverFund, and I started DeliverFund with this guy, Sean, who's a freaking IT guy. Like he specializes in like data security and sharing of like patient records within hospital systems, right? I mean, that was what he did. It wasn't, you know, some freaking, you know, super ninja door kicker. And so we as a community, like when I started DeliverFund, we've had so many people come along and been like, oh, that seems like a good idea. Yeah, we're going to do the same thing. Right. And then like trying to go after donors, trying to go after different people. Okay, well, that's great. That's fine. But don't degrade me in the process.
Yeah.
How many people since Black Rifle Coffee has come along, people are like, oh, Evan started Black Rifle Coffee. I'm going to start a coffee company too. And I'm basically going to follow that model. Like it was
But
super
my main
easy
marketing play is going to be to talk shit about Black
about
Rifle
him.
Coffee.
Yeah. Instead of being like, wow, like you realize what Evan pulled off is pretty freaking genius.
Oh, for
like,
sure.
Like super high IQ. And anybody who knows Evan knows super high IQ dude.
I mean, I'd say super medium, but
super medium, but in our community, that's super high. I mean,
Yeah.
really. I mean, and at this table, that's well off the charts.
100%.
So, instead of saying, hey man, like I'm really interested in doing the same thing. Could you help me? I'll bet you anything. I bet you he would help.
He would.
So like, why don't we start actually lifting each other up and like trying to, and you know, we tell the world that we're special people who could change the world. And I honestly believe we are, but let's start proving that instead of allowing it just to be this huge knitting circle that just talks bad about everybody else, because that's the only way I can increase my personal brand is by talking bad about somebody else. Where you might find that other person who you're talking bad about in order to try to redirect resources to yourself would actually give you resources and would help you to build something instead of just trying to defend themselves from, from defend themselves from your efforts to try to tear them down. I was recently written about in a book. from a former soft guy. Highly, highly embellished. That individual had a contract with me with a non-disclosure agreement, with a survivability clause in a non-disclosure agreement, which basically means that he gave me his word he would not discuss the things that we did. Broke it, put it in a book, called him on it. And what his response was, I'm going to tell everybody you were a fraud. I am going to use my massive marketing machine to destroy you, rather than say, you know what, I'm a human being too and I made a mistake, but I'm a man of my word and I'm sorry I did this. Until we as a community start to actually live up, like actually have actions that back up the words that we say, we're just going to continue to never quite advance and get to where we should be as a community. So that's the thing that I would leave people with.
It's a good ending. Until next time.
Thanks for having me, man.
Next year. Cool. All right,
Greatly
man.
appreciated.
Later.